All right, let's get started. Welcome along to those of you that are new. My name is Ahmed. Welcome to the A-Level Excel Economics live stream for Paper 1 2026. There are a couple of things that I just want to address before we begin the session. So first and foremost, for those of you that are here because you think you're going to get some predictions, I hate to disappoint you, but I think that that is one of the worst ways that you can prepare for your exams. Anyone that is selling you the dream that they will know what will come up in the paper is wasting your time, and I genuinely think it's one of the worst things that anyone can do. But what we will do today is go through as many questions as we can. I will identify questions and topics that I think are important that typically get examined year on year. And so knowing how to answer those questions is always going to be very helpful towards getting you an amazing grade. So let's go. Right at the beginning of this session, what I want to do is show you guys a past paper question, and it's a section A. I'm going to do most of today's session on section B, dealing with data response and 25 markers. But just to kind of warm us up a little bit, I want to take you through the following questions. So bear with me while I load it up for you. So it's actually from the old spec, Unit 3, so the equivalent of Theme 3 for you guys. And it is January 2012. So let me just see it there. Okay, right, let's open it up. So Unit 3 will allow me to open it. That'd be great. Stuck. Okay. Sorry, my computer's been really laggy. Hopefully, it will start to pick up a little bit and not be so slow throughout. So, anyways, the question that we're going to deal with is about a total revenue curve that you may or may not have seen. And I just wanted to check that you guys know how to answer in the event that a question like that were to pop up in your exam in section A. Yeah. So those of you that are on TikTok, this is also on YouTube, and it's probably a better idea to get onto the YouTube channel because you can see what I'm showing on my screen, including my board, which I will be using throughout the session as well. Yeah. So let's start with some Unit 3, Jan 2012. Right. Okay, here we go. It's loading. So it is question number 3, and the question is the following. So bear in mind, in the old spec, they had 1 mark for the multiple choice and they had 3 marks for explanation. Now, I know I recognize the fact that you guys don't have explanation marks. However, for you guys, 3 or 4 markers in section A. Just want to clarify something very important about it before I show you guys the question. If you get a 3 or 4 marker, which you will in section A, at least one of the marks is reserved for application, which means that you have to reference the data they provided you or apply it to numbers. That is really important to understand because often people get full marks or know the theory really well. They can define the key set terms, answer the question, but they miss out on the extra mark because they don't realize that 3 or 4 markers you must apply to the data. So that's really important to recognize, yeah? All right, this is the question that I wanted to show you guys as a little warm up. So it has the following TR curve. And below it is a kind of made up diagram, which is total profits. Okay. So we've got different levels of output, and clearly the firm is operating at this quantity over here. And you can tell because it says the diagram shows the cost, revenue, and profit for a profit maximizing firm. What can be inferred from these diagrams? Okay, let's just look at it together. Yeah. So hopefully you guys are recognizing something immediately. And if you are, it will make your life so much easier. If you're not, then you're going to struggle to answer this question. And it's why I wanted to begin here. Because if you ever see a TR curve that is a straight line like that, you need to instantly know that this is perfect competition. Only in perfect competition is the TR curve going to look that way. And let me quickly explain why. So let me unshare for a second and instead share my board over here. Yeah. So the TR curve in perfect competition has a unique shape. And that's partly because of the fact that MR and AR are also unique in perfect competition. So hopefully you guys can see my diagram. So here's revenue, right? Normally, a TR curve takes this shape, where it goes up and it goes down. Okay, that is what TR curves look like in all the market structures outside of perfect competition. So things like monopolistic competition, oligopolies, and monopolies, yeah? And the reason why is because the MR curve is downward sloping. In order for you to entice someone to buy an extra unit of your good, you have to offer a lower price. Your margin only keeps basically decreasing, yeah? Whereas in perfect competition, if I just undo for a sec. In perfect competition, one of the things that hopefully you know about firms is that they have no choice but to become price takers. And the logic of why they have to be price takers is because the goods they're selling are homogeneous, meaning they're identical. There are billions of sellers. There are so many people selling the good. And there's perfect information. So imagine hypothetically that all of us are selling, I don't know, cabbage for a living, right? And everyone knows the market price of cabbage happens to be £1. Now, if any of you try to charge £1, 1p, what would happen to your sales? Well, no one will buy it off you because of the fact that I can get the cabbage anywhere else at a market price of £1. Therefore, it never ever makes sense for you to be charging £1, 1p. This therefore means that marginal revenue, the revenue that you get from selling an extra unit, is constantly going to be that £1. So if I draw that out, what does that look like? Well, MR equals AR, and it's equal to the demand curve. And my made up example over here was £1. Yeah. In other words, every single unit that you sell, you're just going to keep getting £1 per unit, right? Hence why marginal revenue is just a perfectly elastic line. Yeah. The other way to understand this, by the way, because I want you to understand economics in a logical way, is that when we're determining factors regarding elasticity of demand, where we go like, oh, is demand elastic or is it inelastic? One of the things we look at is the availability of substitutes, right? So if there are close substitutes in the market, do you guys agree that demand is elastic, right? So for example, if I have like a red board pen and a green board pen, I couldn't really care less between them. They're just different colors. Therefore, they're very strong substitutes, meaning the price of one going up leads to a massive increase in demand for the other. All right, think about it in terms of perfect competition. If the goods being sold are homogeneous, in other words, they are identical, they're literally the same good. They're not just substitutes, they are perfect substitutes. And because they are perfect substitutes, it means demand isn't just elastic, it's perfectly elastic. And hence why AR is perfectly elastic on the diagram over here, yeah? Anyways, right, this is all a really kind of long way of explaining that because of the fact that marginal revenue and average revenue have to be elastic or perfectly elastic, this is what the TR curve is going to look like. So if I add page, if I draw what the TR curve looks like in perfect competition, what do I get? Well, I've got quantity over here and I've got revenue on the x-axis, yeah? It must be a straight line. And the reason why it must be a straight line is because in my made up example a second ago, where I said to you that the market price was £1, well, that means that when I sold one unit, my revenue was £1. So let's say that was one unit and that was £1. Yeah. And then when I sell two units, wow, how much does my revenue go up to? It goes up to £2 and £3 and £4 and so on and so forth. And this is important to recognize then. If you see a TR curve that is a straight line without even thinking about it, you go, it's perfect competition. Has to be perfect competition. And now that we know that, if we go back to the question itself, it makes our life much easier. It's much easier to now spot what the answer must be and to be able to discount some of the other options as well. So if you look at the data, it shows the firm operates in a perfectly competitive market in the short run. Now, it's a bit lame because it is the answer, but can I explain why? Because if they're maximizing profit, as you can clearly tell they are, because they're operating at the biggest gap between TR and TC, yeah? Well, at that level of output of 6,000 units, can you guys see that they're making profit? In other words, they're making supernormal profit. Normal profit on that diagram, by the way, would be zero, yeah? And can they make normal profit? So can they make, sorry, supernormal profit in the long run in perfect competition? No, they can't. They can only ever make normal profit. And so the fact that they're making supernormal profit and that we know it's perfect competition instantly, instantly recognizes the fact that it must be A. It must be the short run and it must be perfect competition. But let's quickly go through some of the other options, yeah? The firm will produce at a quantity of 6,000 units in the long run. Well, no. If you're not sure, you should watch my video going through the transition diagram between the short run and the long run in perfect competition, because what will end up happening is firms are going to enter the market here. And so the industry output, by the way, will go up, but each individual firm will end up selling less. So the most important thing to know is that output doesn't stay the same for both neither the individual nor the firm in the long run, because firms are going to enter or exit depending on whether they're making super profit or losses. Yeah. So it can't be B. See, there are barriers to entry and exit. Well, hopefully we know from our revision that perfect competition, there are no barriers to entry. Yeah, so it can't be C. D, the firm will produce at any output between 2,650 and 8,000 units. You can always discount those type of options, by the way, because profit maximization is always at a specific level of output. It's always like at MC equals MR. There's no other output level. So it's not a range of output. It can't be D. And then finally, obviously, the firm is not making a loss. They're clearly making super normal profit. Right, now we're warmed up. Let's go. What I want us to do, please, is to go through an 8 marker to begin with. One that is a fairly straightforward, easy 8 marker, and then one that is actually quite an awkward 8 marker. So the 8 marker that I want us to begin with is from the 2020 paper. So it's one of the COVID years, paper 1. Let's share. Let's go back here. Let's go. Now, for those of you that have watched my channel before, you'll recognize that I bang on about how the 8 marker is what I regard as the killer question in the exam. And I don't say that because I think that, it's the hardest question in the exam. Far from it. It's because of the fact that kids often overwrite in the 8 marker. They write substantially more than what they actually need to write and end up dying because they've wasted so much time. Yeah, well done, you got 8 out of 8, but now you have to deal with a 10, 12, 15, and 25 marker and you're out of time. So you cannot and should not never exceed 8 minutes on an 8 marker. If you get extra time, I factor that in, add it in. But the 8 marker is non-subjective, right? It's important to understand that, meaning that it's just right and wrong. There is no in between. It's not leveled. It's not based on the level of depth you provide and how good your explanation is. It's just answer the question, and I'll show you guys what I mean with a question. So let's look at 2020, and it looks like this. Right, here we go. So in the 2020 paper, they have the following 8 marker. With reference to figure 2, examine 2 possible factors which may have caused demand for rail travel. It may have influenced demand for rail travel since 2008. Right, it's really important to understand something. A question where it says possible factors means it's not necessarily from the data. And in fact, the data here just is showing us what's happening to the number of passengers going on rail travel. But like that means that anything, as long as you can explain it and you have like theoretical explanations behind your justification, are going to be valid. Yeah. So let's look at what happened according to figure 2 to the amount of people going on the train. So here's figure 2. Right. Very blatantly, we can see that the number of people. Oh, what did I do? Didn't mean to do that. Okay, that was not on purpose. Technology. Hey, let's go back to it. So the number of people going on the train has clearly gone up, right? It's blatantly gone up throughout the period. And the date that they were referencing, by the way, was specifically since 2008. Yeah. Now, 2 of the marks are reserved for application for an 8 marker. So you need to make sure that you are applying it to the data. Yeah. And then let's run through some theory. What might cause demand to go up? There are a variety of different options, but I want to go through what I regard as the simplest, the ones that are theoretically sound, but ones that you can explain pretty quickly as well. So let's start. So let me unshare my screen for a second and instead share my board. Okay. One of the things you should hopefully know about is that what will determine demand, or one of the factors determining, whether there's going to be more or less demand for a good or service, is the availability of substitutes or the price of substitutes. Yeah. So this is where we deal with like XCD. XCD, you should hopefully know, is the percentage change in quantity demanded of good B, or in our case here, let's say like bus travel, yeah, sorry, rail travel, and it's over the percentage change in the price of good A, which I guess in this case would be like, petrol cars or cars generally, yeah? All right, think about it logically, yeah? If people are going on the train more, does that mean that cars are cheaper or more expensive? Well, obviously, cars are becoming more expensive, and if they're more expensive, they're therefore substituting away from the substitute, which is petrol cars or cars, towards using trains more often. Yeah, that is a very easy first analysis. So it could be something along the lines of one factor that may have led to an increase in the demand for rail travel is an increase in the price of substitute forms of transport, such as cars. Cool, nice, easy topic sentence, and that is your knowledge mark. Yeah, you then quote from the figure. You go according to figure 2, and then the number of passengers have gone up from blah 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 to blah blah, right? If the price of petrol or petrol cars has increased, individuals may be switching away from the more expensive mode of transport and using trains instead. That is 1 mark analysis. How easy is that? That is your 3 marks. That shouldn't even take 3 minutes, by the way, but let's say it takes 3 minutes, yeah? That's our first paragraph of analysis. Now, how else can I fix this? How else can I basically deal with this? The other way I can look at it is through YED. Because what does YED tell me? So YED, just a quick revision, and we are going to do elasticities properly, is the percentage change in quantity demanded over the percentage change in income. Okay, right. One of the things that YED will tell me is whether goods are normal goods or inferior goods, right? And if the demand for a good is rising, well, if it's an inferior good, and realistically, public transport like rail travel probably is an inferior good, then it might suggest that incomes are going down. So what do we say? So the second analysis is another possible reason why rail travel demand has increased is due to falling incomes. Yeah. And then again, you quote from the data, and now you say that rail travel may be considered an inferior good. And thus, as incomes in the UK may have fallen from 2008, it may have resulted in an increase in demand for rail travel since the YED for rail travel is likely to be negative. Yeah, no, that's like me adding a little bit more than I needed to, by the way, but you should know that inferior goods, the way you know they're inferior goods is the YED is negative. Yeah, just to clarify why, because the whole concept is that your demand goes up as your income goes down, your income going up and your demand goes up. They do the opposite basically. So if this is like positive, the top of the fraction would be negative. So obviously they make a negative always, yeah? So anyways, that's it. How straightforward is that, by the way, to get the 6 marks? And it requires like just 6 sentences, maybe 7, 8 sentences at most, yeah? And now you got the 6 analysis marks. Now, evaluation typically is things like short run, long run for like 8 markers. They're pretty pathetic evaluations. So it'll be things like, oh, the demand for air travel maybe begin to start falling as incomes start to go up again, and maybe people can start switching back to like petrol cars or cars or other modes of transport. That would work. Yeah, it's not an amazing evaluation, but it will do. Doesn't need to be amazing for an 8 marker, just to be clear. Yeah. Now, importantly, 8 mark evaluations. One of the most common questions I get is, should I be doing 2 separate evaluations or one? I strongly recommend and prefer you guys to do one because you just do one and explain it. That's enough. And it doesn't matter which of the 2 points you're evaluating or even generically evaluating, it will get credit. Now, in the event the examiners just give you one out of the 2 marks, we live with it. It's okay. I'd rather you do that than have to work out two separate evaluations for an 8 and waste time. Go and write one evaluation at the end of the analysis after you do the 2 points and move on. Yeah. Be happy with your life and get on with your life. Yeah. Okay. Right. That is our first 8 marker. Let's do a far more difficult 8 marker, which on the surface level looks okay, but is a bit of a weird 8 marker. So it is June 2022. Next track's all about coffee and coffee beans and all that fun stuff. Right. So the 8 marker says the following. With reference to figure 2 and your understanding of price elasticity, examine two factors that may cause significant changes in the international price of coffee beans. Okay, so let's quickly look at figure 2 and we'll be able to see that, prices fluctuate quite wildly for coffee beans. These are pretty significant wild like increases in prices and decreases in prices. Yeah. So August 2020, for example, it goes up by 11.1% relative to just a month ago. That's a big price change. Yeah. So on the surface level, this seems pretty straightforward. Now, examiners, the very next day, once the exam was sat, were given a memo, and it basically said, look, we realized that this was probably worded in a confusing way. Kids found this really difficult, so mark this fairly leniently. So to be clear, if it's worded in a way that's a bit awkward, just answer it to the best of your ability, but recognize the fact that they are going to read all of your scripts, and if everyone found something really difficult or was really confusing, it will be marked more leniently. Yeah? Okay, so in a nutshell, we need to work out through PED, PES, YED, any of the elasticities, why prices of commodities like coffee, are so volatile. And the way that I want you to understand it is the following. So let me add page. Let's go over here. Right. So let's start off with the definition or the formula for PED. What is PED? Well, PED is the percentage change in quantity demanded over the percentage change in the price. Now, it's really important to understand something that the way that elasticity works is the bottom of the fraction changes first, so the price changes, and then demand reacts to that change, right? Now, if we're saying that the price is going, let's say, up, in order for that to happen, it must be that supply is shifting. If demand is going to respond to the change in the price, we're going to assume that supply is going to shift. Okay, let's just work out something about coffee. Do you guys think the demand for coffee is likely to be elastic or inelastic? The answer, hopefully fairly straightforward, is that it's probably very inelastic. Why? Because it contains caffeine and caffeine is fairly addictive, right? Especially a lot of adults are very much addicted to coffee, yeah? So what does that look like if demand is inelastic? If demand is inelastic, it looks like this. So it's a downward sloping line and it looks closer to an I, inelastic, than it does an E, elastic, yeah? So here is the demand curve. Okay, so that's D1. And then just a normal upward sloping supply curve. Let's just do a standard supply curve like this. Okay, and let me just walk through the logic of what's going to happen now. So imagine that in a given year or in a given month, there's a fairly bad harvest. The amount of coffee beans that are grown and produced has gone down. So the supply, do you guys agree, is going to go and shift inwards? Yeah, so it's going to go like this. Now, that is not a significant inward shift of supply. And what happens though is that because people are so addicted to coffee, and because of the fact that they are so desperate to have coffee, because now coffee's slightly more scarce than it was before, in order for you to be able to get coffee, you're going to have to pay a pretty significant price. The price is going to go up a lot more than how much demand decreases. In other words, demand hardly shifts. So imagine the following. Imagine that there are 100 people in the room and all of them are desperate to buy coffee. Yeah. And suddenly now there is less coffee available. Before each of them was able to buy 1 unit of coffee. Now suddenly for some reason there's less coffee available. Do you guys agree that it's like an auction? And this is how prices work in a free market, which is that goods get rationed based on whoever is willing and able to pay the highest price. So now the fact that coffee becomes scarce, it translates into a really sharp increase in price. Because of the fact that people are so desperate to have coffee, the price goes up a lot more than how much demand decreases by, because it's price inelastic. That would be the first analysis. It's to basically explain that given that demand is inelastic, when there's a bad harvest and supply shifts inwards, given that people are willing to, like, desperately want coffee, they are willing to pay a significantly higher price, and thus the increase in the price results in a less than proportionate fall in demand. There's not a dramatic change in the demand. That's the first analysis. Second analysis. The second way that I would deal with this is now not PED, I do it through PES. So again, let's understand what PES is. PES is the percentage change in quantity supplied over the percentage change in the price. Okay, again, in order for supply to be reacting to the price change, the price needed to have changed. So now we're dealing with demand shifting first and then supply reacting to the change in the price. Again, to make our life easier, let's just go through the idea of like prices going up. Logically, do you guys agree that if you're a supplier, when prices go up, you want to supply more, you want to make more money, right? Okay, so let's run through what it's going to look like. Now, again, my question to you guys is the following, is that do you think the supply of coffee beans is elastic or inelastic? Again, the answer is inelastic because it takes time to grow. So realistically, even if the price of coffee were to go up, you can't really scale up your production enormously. So again, now let's draw it out. Now bear in mind, I'm drawing this out for illustrative purposes, and I don't mind that you guys also draw it in the exam for an 8 marker if it helps to explain the concept, but it's a bit excessive. You don't need to for an 8 marker, but I just want to show you guys. So if I draw a really inelastic supply curve now, so like this, and then just a standard downward sloping demand curve. So here we go. This is D1, and here is the quantity Q1, and here is the price P1. Yeah? Okay, now, if suddenly there are more people wanting to buy coffee, in fact, June 2018, paper 3 is an extract about how more people are buying coffee in the UK. Lovely. Anyways, but imagine that just now suddenly more people buying coffee for whatever reason, yeah? Would you guys agree the demand is going to shift outwards? So more people now want coffee compared to how many people wanted it, let's say a month ago. Yeah. Again, though, what happens? Because of the fact that the farmers cannot scale up production significantly, the only way that you're going to have access to coffee or be able to buy more coffee is that you're going to have to accept that the price you're going to have to pay is going to go up a lot. Hence why August 2020, I think it was, the price went up by 11.1%. So now, I know it's not that obvious on the diagram, but hopefully the concept is clear enough. Can you see that the quantity only goes up a teeny tiny bit, but the price goes up a lot more? This is why. Does that make sense? That is how you deal with a really awkward question like that. Because that honestly is, I think, one of the most difficult 8 markers they've set so far. Let's evaluate it. Now, the evaluation generically for PES, by the way, this also works if it's a 10 marker on PES, is to just say the following, is to say that, well, if they have stockpiles of coffee beans, then in the short run, they're able to flood the market. If I've got reserves of coffee beans that I hadn't sold previously, do you guys agree that when the price goes up, I can actually increase my supply a lot? And if my supply suddenly increases a lot more, the price doesn't fluctuate as much. It doesn't go up as dramatically as what I just showed a second ago, yeah? So in other words, if you've got stockpiles of a commodity of any good, then you are able to scale up. And realistically, by the way, coffee doesn't really expire that quickly. Coffee beans, you can probably hold for at least a year or so, I think, right? And therefore, the likelihood is that they probably would have stockpiles. Does that make sense? That is how you get 8 out of 8. That's a nice little warm up, right? Now that you guys are warmed up, let's dive deep. Let's deal with, I already have begun dealing with elasticities and elasticity type questions. So let's kind of explore that a little bit. And then we're going to move on and start talking about monopsonies and all that fun stuff. Right. So elasticities, in terms of questions that they have asked, that 8 marker, of course, is a very awkward one. I just want to now talk about another 8 marker, which caused a lot of issues for people, which is June 2023. Right, so let's go to June 2023. It's all about Netflix and streaming services and great stuff like that. Right, so here is the 8 marker. I'm sure you guys have probably seen it as part of your revision. It says the following, it says, with reference to the information provided, examine the likely numerical value of the cross elasticity of demand between UK online streaming services. Okay. The thing that really threw people off here is the fact that it says using a numerical value. Yeah. And they thought that the numerical value had to basically come from the data. It is not from the data. What they're basically testing is whether you understand how the number affects whether they are strong or weak substitutes. Let's answer this in less than 8 minutes and get 8 out of 8. Are you ready? Let's deal with it. Often economics, I mean, not often, always, economics is logical, yeah? And so you are able to work things out in the exam, whatever they ask about, you are able to just think, okay, does that apply? And it doesn't make sense logically. If it does, then it's the answer, yeah? Right, let's start at the beginning, which is our first knowledge mark. Our first knowledge mark, obviously, is to define XCD. And I do not want you guys to define any of the elasticities in any other way except for the formula. It gets you the same mark as wording it, like writing the whole worded definition. Why word it? Just get it as a formula, it gets the number of marks, and it's quicker. So percentage change in quantity demanded of good B divided by the percentage change in the price of good A. Right, quick revision. What do I know from XCD? Well, what does XCD tell me? XCD will tell me whether goods are substitutes or complements, right? So what does it mean for to be substitutes? Obviously, it means that they're similar goods. They have similar characteristics. So maybe like Coca-Cola and Pepsi. It could be like, I don't know, Apple and Samsung. And we'll talk about whether these are good substitutes or not in a second, right? So substitutes are that, yeah? Now, how do I know that something is a substitute? The way that I know they are substitutes is that they have a positive XED. Yeah. A silly way of remembering it is in a football match, a manager brings on a substitute in the hope that they have a positive impact on the game. Do you guys agree? You don't bring on a substitute and go, oh, go ruin the game for us. Let's lose, right? You hope that they basically have a positive impact on the game. Yeah. So that's how I remember it. Okay, let's start right at the beginning. So our first knowledge mark was that. Now we basically go, all right, Netflix, Disney Plus, streaming services. Do we think they're substitutes or do we think they're complements? They're probably substitutes, right? So you go streaming services such as a Disney Plus and Amazon Prime, Netflix, whichever ones you want to basically reference, are likely to be substitute goods. Okay, why? Why are they substitutes? As they provide a very similar service, namely providing movies and TV services like TV shows. Yeah, cool, nice and easy. Now this is where we get into the numerical value. What do they mean by the numerical value? Well, they wanted you to basically explore whether they're likely to be strong substitutes or weak substitutes. Quick revision. If XCD is greater than 1, and to be clear, by the way, it's greater than 1 if it's like a complementary good, that would also apply, it would just be -1. Yeah. So the number itself is what determines elasticity and therefore it determines whether they're strongly or weakly related. Then we've got XCD is less than 1. And then finally, we're going to do XCD is equal to 0. Okay. Let's go through all three of them. Starting with greater than 1. Right. Firstly, if it's greater than 1, do we agree that that means the demand is elastic? Yeah. What does that mean? It's like very reactive. Well, that would indicate that they're strong substitutes. In my example earlier today, I talked about how like the red pen and the green pen for like board pens, yeah? Do you guys agree the second the green pen goes up, I'm off. I'm going to go buy the red pen instead. Therefore, if it's elastic and you're far more responsive, it's strongly related. They're strong substitutes or complements, yeah? So if it was complements, by the way, it'd be like XCD of minus 1.6 as an example, yeah? Okay, so that's the first thing. If XCD is less than 1, obviously you should therefore know they're going to be weak substitutes. And then the last one is interesting, which is the XCD is equal to 0. That's a good one because it's a good one for evaluation, not for this question, but for another potential question, whereby there is no relationship between the two. And this can serve as a really clever evaluation, by the way, because in one of the old specs papers for Edexcel, it was about how the price of beef was going up. And it was like, what would happen to the demand for like chicken and fish? So as analysis, you go, yeah, the substitutes, the sources of protein. As the price of beef has gone up, people are going to switch away from beef and buy more chicken and fish. Okay, perfect. That's the analysis. Genius evaluation is to go, if someone's a pescatarian, in other words, they only eat fish, the XCD for them is 0. There's no relationship between those two goods for them. That is wow evaluation, yeah? But anyways, let's go back to our question. So it is subjective. It is up to you now whether you think that they are strong substitutes or weak substitutes. It doesn't matter. There is no right answer here as long as you can justify it with a made up number. I'm going to argue they're strong substitutes. I'd argue they're strong substitutes because they have a lot of shows that are on both platforms, but Disney Plus and Netflix, right? A lot of movies overlap between them as well. So my starting point is to say that a possible numerical value for Netflix and Disney Plus, and I'm going to make up a number, and my number is going to be 1.5 plus, make sure you do a plus actually, plus 1.5. Okay, you could go and do crazy numbers, but I think just reasonable, just above 1 is good enough, yeah? Okay, so what does that mean? That means that they are strongly related. And I want you guys to be extra safe to now do a following application, which is to now recognize that your best friend is the number 10. And can I tell you why the number 10 is your best friend? Because all of you could do a 10 times table in your head. So if I've just set my XCD equal to plus 1.5, all I now say is, that means that if the price of, now good A, we're going to say is Netflix, if the price of Netflix goes up by 10%, so if the bottom of this fraction is going up by 10%, do you guys agree that you can obviously take it to the other side of the equation and tell me how much demand for Disney Plus is going to go up by? And hopefully your maths is good enough that you don't need a calculator for this. If you do, get a grip. It's obviously going to go up by 15%. And the way we word that is we go that given this, a 10% rise in the price of Netflix would result in a more than proportionate increase in the demand for Disney Plus of 15%. And you've got 6 out of 6 with time to spare. That is our 6 marks of analysis. Let's evaluate. If I said as my analysis that they are strong substitutes, I now go, now they're weak substitutes. They might be weak, and I provide a justification. And the justification is pretty good here, by the way. It's to basically say something along the lines of, well, both platforms have exclusive shows. The extract even mentions, for example, like Stranger Things. So you could talk about how, well, if someone's a big fan of Stranger Things, they're probably not going to switch over to Disney Plus, even if Netflix becomes more expensive. Yeah? And so that is the evaluation, and that gets you all the marks. Yeah, that is 8 out of 8. And hopefully that is like really, really clear. And you guys have an understanding of how to answer that. Let's delve into monopsony power. All right. So you know what? Before I actually show you guys a past paper, let's do some revision. First and foremost, if you're stuck in the exam and you forget what a monopsony is, you get a question about monopsony, you go, I can't know what monopsony is. There are simple ways for you to go around that. The first thing that you're going to do to yourself is you're going to say, hey, what does it sound like? Well, a monopsony sounds like a monopoly. And what is a monopoly? A monopoly is a single powerful seller. Therefore, a monopsony is a powerful buyer. The definition that I would write down in an exam is as follows: is a monopsony is where there is a single or small group of powerful buyers. Now, before we start dealing with questions, I want to talk about the effect of monopsony power from the perspective of the monopsonist. So think of it this way. Imagine that Tesco are suddenly exerting a higher degree of monopsony power. Okay, what does that mean? That's really fancy language, but what does it actually mean in day-to-day terms? That means that Tesco are forcing the farmers, the suppliers, to accept lower prices. They're turning around to them and saying, hey, you know your potatoes? We want you to reduce the price of your potatoes, otherwise I'm going to buy it off you. And because the farmers have no choice but to accept the prices Tesco dictate to them, because it's their biggest buyer, they're going to accept it. So what does that do from Tesco's perspective? And this is our first sophisticated diagram of the live stream, which is we're going to draw a cost and revenue diagram, looking at it through the lens of Tesco. Now, if you are not incredible at drawing these diagrams, I cannot recommend enough watching my video, taking you through a systematic step-by-step approach to constructing cost and revenue diagrams. It is one of the most vital skills that you need to perfect before Monday's exam, more than any other skill, yeah? So in my step-by-step, those of you that know it, I always start with just do it, the MC curve, which looks like a Nike tick, yeah? So here's MC. Step 2 is we're going to draw AR and MR, which are perfectly like that, straight lines like that. That's AR equals D. I start at the same point for MR. I prefer you guys to do the same, by the way. MR goes through the axes. And then you go and get the most important point on the diagram, which is to go to profit maximization. MC equals MR. This is Q1. You then go up from that point until you hit the demand curve, AR, and that will be the price, and that's P1. And then we should always assume a firm is making supernormal profits unless we're explicitly told otherwise. For example, like November 2021, clearly Thomas Cook are making a loss. So I probably should have making a loss to begin with. Yeah. So here I'm going to draw my AC curve like that. And then I go up from Q1 until I hit the AC curve and I dot across and I label that C1. Right. You guys in the exam on Monday do not have the luxury of being able to change color pens. And therefore, it is so important to recognize that when shifts are occurring on your diagram, do not shade in the area for supernormal profits. It's too confusing for examiners. What instead I want you to do is hopefully you recognize that it's this rectangle. We're going to label it as letters. So we've got P1 and C1 obviously already, and then we're going to label this as A and this is B. Cool. So that is the area for supernormal profit to begin with for Tesco. Okay. Now, if Tesco suddenly exert monopsony power, so they now force down the price they pay for things like their potatoes and like lemons and whatever, what does that do from Tesco's perspective? Well, do you guys agree that Tesco are reducing their costs? They are actually reducing specifically their variable costs because a variable cost is the cost of each unit. So if every single potato that I'm now buying as Tesco from the farmer is cheaper, my variable costs are going down. And if variable costs are going down, both MC and AC are going to shift. Now, in theme one, when you did shifts like, demand curves, supply curves, you dealt with shifts in terms of like outwards and inwards. I don't want you to deal with as outwards and inwards for cost and revenue curves. It's too confusing. I prefer you to just think of shifts for cost curves as up or down. Simple as that. So in our example over here, are costs going to go up or are they going to go down? They're obviously going to go down because Tesco are forcing down how much they pay for the potatoes. Which curve do I shift first? Because there is an order that you must follow, and it is the MC curve. The same curve that I began with, I now shift the MC curve down like this, and I'll label that as MC2. Now, a lot of you might be saying, oh, now basically go and, shift the AC curve down. No, 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 no. We're not shifting the AC curve just yet. What we now need to do is go to the profit maximizing level of output, which is this point here, Q2. And then we go up from that quantity until we hit the demand curve, hits it there. So the price they're going to charge is going to go down. And then only then are we going to shift the AC curve down, yeah? And it's important to recognize two things. The new AC curve needs to be lower than the old one at every level of output. And the second thing is that it now crosses at its lowest point on the new MC curve, which is why we needed to draw the MC curve first. So I'm going to pick a point like here and go out like that, and that's AC2. And then I go up from my new best friend, Q2. That's my guiding point. If you know the quantity, by the way, you are in control of your diagram because from your quantity, you can always work out the price by going up to the AR curve, and you're always able to go up and get the cost by going up to the AC curve. So let's go up from Q2 We'll hit the AC curve over here. This is C2. Do not forget to label the corner of your area to make sure the super non-profit area is clear. Can you guys see it's there? Now, I promise I know my alphabet. I purposely missed out the letter C because we already have C's on the diagram. So I do D and I do E. All right. This is the diagram. So from the perspective of Tesco, when they exert a higher degree of monopsony power, what ends up happening is the prices they charge us will go down, which is important to recognize, by the way. Their output, their sales are going to go up, and their profits are going to go up, right? They can reduce their costs, and therefore they're going to increase their profits. Yeah, is that really clear? That is our diagram from the perspective of the monopsonist. Okay, this is the thing about preparing for your exam. It's recognizing through past papers there are only set ways that they can ask questions on certain topics, yeah? And for a monopsony, there is literally just two questions they can ever ask. Number one is the first question that I want us to deal with, which is the factors that suggest monopsony power is either high or low, that the degree of monopsony power. And then the other question is the effective monopsony power. We'll deal with that, but let's start with the degree of monopsony power. And in order to answer that, I want to take you guys to June 2012, Unit 3. So let's go old spec. Here we go. So Unit 3, June 2012. It will load. Right. Don't know why the website's being so laggy. Like, it's really annoying. But anyways, while it loads, let me just run you guys through some revision in terms of the key things that we need to look for to determine whether a monopsony power in a market is high or low. So the first thing is that do you guys agree that if monopsony power is high, there would only be a few big buyers? Obviously, yeah? And so if there's only a few big buyers, that would indicate monopsony power is high. The second thing that would indicate monopsony power is high is if the supplier's profits are going down. Now, the profits could be going down, by the way, for one of two reasons or both. It could be because they're being forced to accept lower prices, so their revenue is falling. But it could also be that their costs are going up, but they're unable to pass the extra costs on over to the supermarkets or the monopsonist, and therefore, again, their profits are going down. Yeah, some of the suppliers might even be shutting down. By the way, that could be something that could be occurring. That would indicate monopsony power is high. Three, we would be getting lower prices, consumers. The diagram we just showed is a really good diagram. It illustrates that when variable costs go down, we end up paying a lower price. Yeah, those are the kind of things. If it's easy for you to switch between suppliers, etc. Now, I'm going to whiz through the question. I'm going to go into crazy levels of depth just so that we can cover a lot of content in the live. But let's just run through the question. So the question was the following. It says, using examples from the extracts, assess the degree of monopsony power in the groceries market. And I'm going to just direct you guys towards basically where the answer is, yeah, where all the kind of key points are. So the first thing is if we look at the pie chart, yeah, so obviously this is an outdated pie chart. They will give you a more relevant pie chart in your data response if they were to ask this, yeah. The first thing that we do is I'd calculate the three firm concentration ratio. And the three firm concentration ratio, I can remember it, don't worry, is 63.9%, yeah. That means the three biggest firms in the market account for basically 2/3 of the market. Is monopsony power likely to be high or low here? Well, obviously it's going to be high because of the fact that if you're a seller, if you're a supplier, you have practically no choice but to sell most of your output to either Tesco, Asda, or Sainsbury's. So therefore, they can dictate prices to you very easily. That is our first indicator that monopsony power is clearly high. Yeah. Then if we look at the extract, if we zoom in and kind of deal with a few things, I'm going to jump into where it is. There's a quote in the extract which starts the following: a fresh burst of commodity inflation has raised input costs, and the buying power of the big supermarket makes it hard for food manufacturing firms to pass these extra costs on. Right, that is a very long sentence. Let's dissect it together. Fresh bursts of commodity inflation. What is commodity inflation? Commodity inflation is basically like oil prices are going up. So in other words, the farmers, the suppliers, like Northern Foods in this extract, their costs of production are going up. So what would they want to do? In an ideal scenario, they would go and pass over to the supermarket the higher price. But when they go to Tesco and go, oh, you know what, our costs have gone up, and can I please charge you a higher price? Tesco look at them, laugh at them, and go, no. And therefore, clearly, what will be happening to the profits for the suppliers? They would be going down, right? Does that make sense? In other words, your first piece of evidence, other than the pie chart, is to go, one factor that suggests monopsony power in the market is high is that suppliers' profits are falling. You now quote from the extract and you just explain it. You develop it by talking about how, given that their costs are rising, but they're unable to raise their revenue, this would suggest that their profits are likely to be falling, and thus their monopsony power in the market is clearly high. Yeah, that is one. Two, another one is this sentence: the grocer's influence is a benefit to consumers. And then we skip all the bit about dominated, blah, blah, blah. The margin squeeze from manufacturers are shared with shoppers. That is a great quote. The diagram that I just drew a second ago, showing that variable costs fell for the supermarket and we ended up getting a lower price, There's your evidence in the data. So the fact that prices are falling for consumers is indicative of monopsony power. That is, by the way, an exceptional point to draw upon because you can then draw the diagram and be like, hey, monopsony power is probably quite high. Yeah, cool. Right, there are other things in there. Now, let's go on the other side about why monopsony power may not be so high. Starting with a generic one that would always work. A generic one is the CMA. The CMA could intervene and be like, you need to stop that and prevent like excessive monopsony power. So monopsony power can be restricted because of regulation. Yeah. In fact, June 2017, it's all about that. And we are going to do June 2017 in a second. But the other thing is that do you think that supermarkets like Tesco are able to dictate prices to, let's say, Coca-Cola? Well, the answer is obviously no, because if the firm that they're buying off has really strong monopoly power or brand loyalty, they can fight back. And again, it's in the data. It says multinational firms such as Nestle or Unilever possess the strength and the famous brands to fight back. Yeah. Don't know if you guys know who Unilever are. They're one of the biggest companies in the world. But even if you don't know who these companies are, you should know Nestle, like Nesquik and stuff like that. But even if you didn't, the fact that they're multinational firms, what does that mean? Multinational firms are firms that operate all over the world. So obviously these are big, big brands. These are companies that can fight back, right? That restricts and limits monopsony power. Yeah. Now, another thing that can limit monopsony power is if suppliers merge, right? Because before, if there were loads of sellers, I could basically start kind of pitching them against each other. I go, oh, if you don't sell it to me at this price, I'll go to the farm next door and I buy it at that price from them. And so you kind of have to accept the lower price. But now, if you merge, you can now fight back because of the fact that you might sell a wider range of goods and services. You're a bigger firm now. You can basically not be abused as easily, if you like. Yeah. And the extract has a whole paragraph about this. It talks about how Northern Foods are looking to merge with a company called Greencore. And my favorite quote in the entire extract is this. It goes, behind the push for a merger was a belief that a bigger, more diversified firm would not be so easily bullied by retailers. Yeah. It's somewhere here. Where is it? There we go. Yeah. There. Cool. So it was all about the fact that they could merge, and that would be an exceptional evaluation to say, hey, look, actually, monopsony power might be restricted. Yeah. Just really quickly, is just the last evaluation that would also work for a question like this, which is a really good evaluation as well, is that if you're saying that suppliers' profits are going down and some of them are actually shutting down, right? One of the sensible evaluations that you can do, depending on the data, is to question whether the profits falling are exclusively due to monopsony power, or maybe that firm is just not very good. And that point is made so much more powerfully if you've got examples of other suppliers that are thriving. If there are other suppliers that are doing really well, you go, well, monopsony power may not be the reason for Northern Foods declining, right? They're declining fortunes. And here it is. It's literally all there, yeah? It talks about a company called Cranswick who are doing really well. There's another one called Kerry Group that are doing really well. In other words, there are other suppliers that are thriving. And so the Northern Foods profits falling may not be because of monopsony power. It might just be that they kind of suck. They're not very good. Yeah, they might be experiencing diseconomies of scale or whatever the reason is. Yeah. Those are the factors that we're looking for. Now, why is that the starting point? Because if you get that as the question, you now know how to deal with it. But the alternative type of question is the effect of monopsony power on a market, right? So, or on like key players. So again, if I go back to the papers, and this time I'm going to do June 2017. Yeah. So June 2017 has a whole extract again about supermarkets. There are two industries they love a lot, by the way. They love supermarkets, they love coffee. Like they're like their comfort industries for EdXL. So June 2017, here we go. Right. It's just loading. And this is what it shows. So the 12 marker is the following. Now, one of the things, I keep doing this and I don't know what I'm doing. I think I'm rotating it. Oh yeah, trying to zoom in. Oh, there we go. Right. One of the things that is so annoying that they sometimes do, but please be very wary of it, is they mix up the order. So rather than it being 5, 8, 10, 12, 15, can you see it goes 5 and 12? Now, I still recommend that you go in the order that they've asked you the question, but for you to recognize that the technique is different depending on the question. So for example, a 12 marker, especially a question like this, because it's asking for two different factors. It's talking about the impact on both food suppliers and consumers. The and should really be in bold, by the way. Yeah. You obviously need two analyses. Now, one really well-developed evaluation will be enough, but I think it makes sense to evaluate twice here to be like safer and also to evaluate each particular player. Yeah. But yeah, go in the order, but recognize the fact that the technique is going to change depending on whether it's a 12, a 10, or an 8, right? Okay, so the question says, with reference to figure 2 and extract A, discuss the possible impact of supermarket monopsony power on both food suppliers and consumers. I'm going to go one step further. Let's deal with it through the only three players they can ever ask about. And let's answer it in a way where you've got multiple points that will work every single time. I'm going to keep this diagram up here. Let's actually zoom down, yeah? In any question about the effects of monopsony power, there can only ever be three players. Player one is the supplier. So the supplier is like the farmer or the firm that sells their product to the supermarket, yeah? Number two is the monopsonist. So in our example, like Tesco. So monopsonist. And then player three is us, consumers, yeah? What happens to us as a result of monopsony power? Okay, let's go through it. Let's start with suppliers. Obviously, if monopsony power is high, do you guys agree the profits for the suppliers are likely to be going down? They're either having to accept lower prices, or when their costs go up, like in the June 2012 paper, they can't pass it on to the supermarket, and therefore, either way, their profits are going down. Now, if you want to extend it a little bit more, you could talk about how some of the suppliers might even be shutting down. Yeah? Beautiful, beautiful analysis. Yeah, that works every single time. You obviously would expect that there would be a fall in profits for suppliers. Yeah. So that's the first player. Yeah. We'll evaluate. In fact, let's evaluate. There are a variety of evaluations. Number one is, yeah, not all suppliers are equal. There are some suppliers, Coca-Cola, for example, who probably will not be abused, who the supermarket cannot exert their monopsony power over. If you're a big brand or if you sell like a range of products, they're not going to be able to abuse you in that way. Yeah. The other thing you could evaluate with is, oh, the suppliers could merge. Yeah. So it could be that actually they end up merging with each other. Yeah. Number three, the other thing is the CMA might intervene and they might protect the suppliers. Yeah. So, anyways, that is big fat tick. Yeah. Monopsonist, right? From the perspective of Tesco, what's going to happen from Tesco's perspective? Well, obviously, the diagram above, right? Their profit's going to go up, right? Their variable costs will go down because they're forcing the suppliers to accept lower prices. You draw that beautiful diagram and you explain it and you're done. You got the analysis marks comfortably there, yeah? Again, the evaluations. Now, all the evaluations they did a second ago, they all work here. It's just that don't do the same evaluation twice in the same essay, obviously. So I could have evaluated by saying, well, no, they can't exert monopsony power over big suppliers. They can't really do this to like, Coca-Cola and Nestle and Unilever and these guys. So that's a valid evaluation. And then again, the one that comes in clutch all the time is the CMA. The CMA might be like, naughty, naughty, yeah, stop it, yeah, don't do that. And they stop them from exerting excessive monopsony power. That's as simple as that. Last player, us, consumers. What happens to us? Diagram again. The diagram illustrates. Now, don't draw the diagram twice, by the way. If it was a question about, let's say, the impact on the monopsonist and the consumer, you just draw the diagram once, but you can keep referencing the diagram. What happens to us? We get lower prices. Therefore, allocative efficiency, by the way, is going to go up. Happy days for us. Or you can say consumer surplus goes up. Both are valid, yeah? And that's it. You're just explaining it again through the lens of the supplier, sorry, the lens of the supermarket, but how that spills over and impacts us in terms of lower prices. Evaluation, they all work. But then we can add one more evaluation, which is realistically, monopsonies are also oligopolies. So if you look at like the market concentration ratio, the 63.9% that we showed in June 2012, well, realistically, do they have to give us a lower price? Are they necessarily going to reduce their prices when monopsony power is high? Well, the answer is obviously no. They could even form a cartel. They might collude and actually charge a higher price, not a lower price. Yeah. And that is all three ticked. And now you know how to answer any question that they can ask on Monday if it comes up on monopsonies. Let's go. Next topic. I want us to deal with externalities. I want to deal with externalities and address the key kind of misconceptions. I want to make sure that you guys know how to answer 12 markers and even potentially 25 markers on externalities as well. And right, let's start with the following. Let's start with what I regard as a fairly topical concept, which is I think it was actually this academic cycle, 25-26, the government raised tuition fees, university tuition fees, for the first time in quite a long time. Yeah. It went up to like £9,535, I think. Don't quote me on that, like you guys can check, but around there. Yeah. And then you could easily get a question about the private and external benefits of higher education. Now, this is actually a past paper a long, long time ago. But the last time they asked about positive externalities like private benefits and external benefits, it was in the June 2023 paper as a 12 mark. It was about online educational resources like this, I guess, right? Or it was like GCSE bite size and things like that. Yeah. Anyways, but the paper I want us to look at is going to be 2012. 2012, Unit 1. That is our paper. Cool. So here we go. So here we go. Lovely. Now, this is at the time when they were raising tuition fees from around £3,000, like 3,250, I think it was, to like £9,000, like big increase in price. Yeah. But what I want us to focus on is this 14 marker, which for you guys will be a 15 or 12 marker. More likely to be a 12 marker for you guys in the new spec. Yeah. It says the following. It says evaluate the likely private benefits and external benefits of university education. Illustrate your answer with an appropriate diagram. Okay, let's start there. How do I structure this and how do I get all the marks every single time? Well, the starting point is to define a concept called private benefit. A private benefit is a benefit that is internal to a transaction. What does that mean? It has a very fancy way of describing something simple, which is that it's the benefit that the person doing the thing is going to get. Yeah. So let's work out logically what we think the private benefit of going to university is. Do you guys agree that if you go to university, you are more likely to basically get higher skills? If you have higher skills, you become more wage inelastic in demand. In other words, firms are forced to pay you a higher wage because there's not as many skilled workers as you. So you can now bargain for higher wages. If you earn higher salary, is that a good or bad thing? Well, obviously, it's a good thing. Why is it a good thing? Because it allows you to buy goods and services like necessities, like energy, and like a house. But also, you might be able to now afford luxuries like going on a holiday and buying a car. Now, don't go crazy because you won't have enough time. But essentially, that is your paragraph about private benefits. You're just identifying what is good about you going to university. Like, why are you benefiting from that thing? Right? Which is really simple. And now, the data will obviously have a private benefit for you. In fact, you know what? Sorry, let me unshare again. It's the most obvious quote in the world in that extract, yeah? And it is the following. It goes, the return on a degree, where is it? It's £160,000 over a working lifetime. What is the exact quote? I definitely remember them saying it somewhere. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So it goes, students should still gain financially. The return on a degree has been estimated at an additional £160,000 over a working lifetime compared to a non-graduate with A levels. Do you guys agree that's an obvious quote? Yeah, you quote it, you go, oh, according to the extract, hey, people go to university, they earn more money than people that don't go to university. Easy in application, yeah? All right, let's deal with external benefits. External benefits are the positive third-party spillover effect arising from a private transaction. That's a really fancy way of describing something straightforward, which is this, is that when people do that thing, society benefits. There's a spillover effect because of the fact that more people are educated. And there's so many points that we can bring in here. One, the government are like to collect more tax revenue, and they can use that to improve like infrastructure or healthcare. I don't know, whatever they could do with it, right? It's likely to attract FDI. I know that's quite macro. It's okay to incorporate macro into micro and vice versa. As long as you're not drawing me like an LRAS curve shifting out here, and like don't get carried away. It's perfectly okay to mix between micro and macro. That's perfectly okay. So you can talk about how like, it's going to attract more FDI and those companies will create more jobs in the economy, etc., etc., etc. Now, again, the data will be very helpful. Look at the data over here. The entire last paragraph is about external benefits. A world-class university education system is vital for attracting investment, tick, and increasing labor productivity, tick, yeah. Bear in mind, by the way, that if I were dealing this as a 25 marker, an utterly genius external benefit that you could talk about here is that because workers are more productive, it means that costs for firms are going down. Their variable costs would go down. It'd be the same diagram I drew a minute ago when we did Monopsony. Yeah, you can discuss that and go, oh my God, look, profits are going to go up. Happy days. That's great stuff. Like firms are going to make more profit. Yeah. But anyways, right? Any of these are all valid. It also says it's going to generate earnings from overseas students. So if you have like a high quality education system, because tuition fees in this case are rising, it might mean that there are more international students that come over to the UK. And when they come over to the UK, do you agree they're going to be spending their money on like local, I don't know, like restaurants and cafes and whatever. And so suddenly there's an external benefit there. The spillover there is that there's more money being generated because there's more demand. Yeah. Okay. Now we need to draw the diagram. Now, this is one of those examples where I think it makes a lot of sense to do all the analysis and then all the evaluations, which is rare, by the way. I normally get you guys to do analysis, evaluation. But for this, it all kind of ties together. So you start off with a private benefit, explain it, contextualize it, and then leave a line and go external benefit, define it, explain it, contextualize it. Then you're going to draw me a positive externality diagram, or well, I'm going to draw one for you. So let's draw it together. So here is a positive externality diagram. And this is how you're going to construct it. Now, for Edexcel, by the way, you guys only need to know positive externalities always as consumption. So if you were taught more than that, look, examiners realistically will still give you credit if you did something that isn't like, let's say like it was a negative consumption externality. Edexcel will only want you to do as a production externality, so just upward sloping curves. But if you drew it, realistically, most examiners are probably going to give you credit for it. But I probably prefer you to just stick with what Edexcel do year on year in terms of their mark scheme. So here we are. On the y-axis, we've got cost forward slash benefits. And on the x-axis, we've got quantity. Yeah? Okay, right. So in a nutshell, the way that I wanted to construct this diagram is to ask yourself a sequence of questions, starting with positive externality. Think about the word positive. Is that to do with costs or benefits? Hopefully you can recognize that benefits are good things. So therefore, it's positive benefits. Yeah? Okay. The other thing is the most common error is that people muddle up marginal cost and marginal benefit lines. Let's never ever make that mistake. And the way we can never make that mistake is come up with a really silly example that you can always remember in the exam. which is the following, is that your favorite chocolate bar, whatever that chocolate bar may be, do you guys agree that you'll enjoy it a lot? The first unit that I give you, you'll enjoy it and get a lot of benefit from it. But then as I give you more and more, like a second, a third, a fourth, I don't know what the threshold is, at a certain point, you start to basically feel sick. In other words, are your benefits increasing or decreasing? Well, they are decreasing. In the same way that, by the way, marginal benefit and marginal utility is also diminishing, yeah? The example that Edexcel asked in one of the past papers is like a buffet. You know how the first time you get up in a buffet, you enjoy it, like you fill up your plate, you know, you're really enjoying the meal. The second time you get up, you enjoy it, but not quite as much as the first. The third, fourth time, you're doing it literally because of the fact that you're just trying to, like, you know, get your money's worth, yeah? You're worried about the prospect of, like, feeling cheated, yeah? So, does that make sense? So, in other words, you're basically going and sorry, it's very far on TikTok. There we go. Yeah. So, you're going and basically getting less and less benefit. So, the thing we go is there are two benefit lines because our analysis is going to focus on the difference in benefits. Now, if there are two downward sloping benefit lines, it follows there must only be one upward sloping line. And the upward sloping line, we can label it immediately because it's just going to be constant. We assume that the cost to the private party and society is going to be the same. Now, just to be clear, externalities, there are always two players. The first player is private meaning the person who does the thing, like goes to university. And then social is the private plus all the external stuff that happens, like external benefits or external costs. Yeah. So this is going to be MPC and it's equal to marginal social cost MSC. Yeah. Okay. Now what I want you to recognize is there are 2 points where there's intersection. There's this point here and this point here. So you're going to dot down from the points of intersection. And then you're going to repeat the following question to yourself in the exam. You go positive externality. Is a positive externality where we do too little of a good thing or too much of a bad thing? Think about the context of university education. We wouldn't be like, oh, there's too many people going to uni, or that, you know, it's really bad. We would say there are too few people doing it. Therefore, which of the two quantities, this one or that one, is obviously the equilibrium? Well, obviously, this is going to be the equilibrium. This is QE, and therefore the price going and adjoining it is PE. This I'm going to give a fancy name. I'm going to call it SO to represent social optimum, which is the ideal amount of university students, yeah? And then now that I know that the equilibrium point is there, do you guys see that dot there where my pen is hovering over? There is only one downward sloping line that cuts through that point. That line that you've yet to label must always be private. It must be, because equilibrium will always be where private cost equals private benefit. The private cost curve is the supply curve. The private benefit line is the demand curve. So this must be MPB. It's the only way for that to be the equilibrium. And therefore, this is MSB. Finally, put my pen on the equilibrium, drawing a straight line, and this is potential welfare gain. Okay, so what society could have gained, but we're not. And all you need to do now to get the marks is once you've gone through the private benefits and external benefits, as I just did, is you draw the diagram and you just explain the diagram. So you say something along the lines of, as the diagram shows, there is an underconsumption of higher education of QE to QSO units, and thus there is untapped welfare gain that society has missed out on. Given this, there is market failure. And now let's evaluate. Evaluations for these type of questions about positive externalities, there are a range of different evaluations that will always work, yeah? So one of the evaluations that you could talk about is the fact that when we say something like higher education, do you guys agree that's a very broad category? Are all courses and all universities likely to be underconsumed? The answer is obviously no. There are certain degrees that realistically the demand for them is very price inelastic, and therefore even if the tuition fees go up, the demand for those courses are hardly going to move. And the extract gives you examples, but the two that I think are the best are medicine and dentistry. Think about why. If you want to become a doctor, do you guys agree that you've got no choice but to do medicine? You can't go and study like English and then rock up at a hospital and go, I studied English, I'm ready to operate, right? You need to have a medical degree in order to do medicine. Therefore, the demand for medicine is likely to be very inelastic. Similarly, dentistry. Those courses then, are they likely to be underconsumed? Well, probably not. In other words, there may not be a market failure for those industries or those type of courses, but there would be for other industries or for other courses. And the extract literally says this. So if you look at the extract with me, it was the second extract, I believe. Here we go. It says, applications for medicine and law would hardly be affected, but there will be a big fall in the numbers applying for arts and humanities courses. In other words, it's going to be a big externality for arts and humanities. There may not be an externality at all for medicine and law. Yeah, that is an outstanding evaluation. Yeah. Second evaluation that you could do. Another evaluation that you could do is to talk about the fact that the private benefits that we just talked about, going to university, are you guaranteed to earn more income than someone that doesn't go to uni? Are you guaranteed to get a job? Are you guaranteed to live like this lush life? Well, the answer is obviously no. And again, if the data supports you, even better, because the extract literally says the following. And by the way, I want you guys to use the word however. I know that sounds boring, yeah, but it's a good signaling device for examiners that you are evaluating. But what you should also be looking for in the extract is the word however, because Edexcel pepper you with clues throughout the extract. And here it goes. However, graduate unemployment reached a 17-year high at 8.9% in 2010. In other words, just because you went to university doesn't mean you're going to get a job. There's no guarantee you get a job, and actually, what you get is loads of debt. And for some people, the debt that they accumulate may mean that actually it wasn't worth it. The amount of earnings they get relative to the debt they get into may not even be worth it. And so you can argue that the private benefits may not happen. Yeah, does that make sense? Other alternative evaluations that work for the positive externalities is it's hard for us to quantify the true extent of external benefits. I can't really tell if the external benefits are as a result of people going to university, like, higher, tax revenue for the government. Well, that might just be an uplift in the economy. It might be that there's, like the taxes in the economy have gone down, like corporation taxes. So in other words, like you can try and justify other reasons as to why, external benefits could arise and not just through higher education. Yeah. Really quickly before I finish positive externalities and deal with negative externalities, if I look at now the 2023 paper, where the last time they asked it in a kind of meaningful way, um, it was the following. And there's, I think, a clever evaluation here, which was relevant to that question, not so relevant to this one, yeah? But bear in mind, another evaluation for the one we just looked at is that the externality and like the underconsumption is probably going to be a lot more meaningful, or it's going to impact low-income households a lot more than high income, right? High-income households, they may not be as badly impacted because they can afford to continue going to university, whereas low-income households, when tuition fees go up, there may be a significant underconsumption of higher education, which is obviously like a big, big problem, yeah? Right, I don't know why my laptop is really lagging. Hopefully the stream is not lagging, but anyways, right, while we wait for it, I can just tell you, I know off a heart. So June 2023 was about private and external benefits of basically online courses. Yeah, like, they had like something called Oak Academy, and then it was about like a GCSE bite size, etc. You've probably used these websites before, right? So again, the analysis is basically the same, right? Private benefits is that you get better grades. Better grades allow you to go to a better university, better grade, a better job, more income. Happy days, yeah? External benefits, exactly what you did. Government collects more tax revenue, more innovation in the economy. The PPF might shift out. I don't know, whatever, right? Now, the evaluation there, even though the ones that I just did are entirely valid as well, but a really good evaluation that you could do there is to talk about how if you sit in front of a computer screen, which is ironic because you're doing it right now, yes, there are benefits because you might get like, really good grades, but can you think of any problems that could arise, like any external like costs, if you like? So what's going on? Why is my internet being so weird? Yeah, so anyways, what are the external costs? Would you guys agree that it's pretty unhealthy to Yes, I accept Google. Do you guys agree that it's pretty unhealthy for you to sit in front of a computer screen for hours on end? And so it might lead to like higher levels of obesity. It could lead to higher levels of like, more people need like, glasses. It's on the mark scheme, yeah. So I know that might be like a genius evaluation, but I think that's pretty clever to say that, yeah, you get the external benefits if more people use these websites. There are also external costs. And the external cost there is that the NHS cost might go up, yeah. All right, cool. That's positive externalities. Let's deal with negative externalities. Now, two things about negative externalities. One is if it's asked as a 25 marker, as they did in June 2018. Here is the question. Let me show you. So June 2018 was the following. It goes. In September 2016, the government approved the building of an 18 billion nuclear power station, Hinkley Point C, which will supply 7% of UK electricity for up to 60 years. The power station is funded by Chinese and French investment. Evaluate the likely private costs and external costs involved in such a major power station construction project using appropriate externalities diagram in your answer. Now, in my opinion, 25 markers and externalities, negative in particular. Positive, I think, is more doable. I would avoid. And the reason I would avoid is not because it's difficult, it's actually the opposite. It's because there's so little to say in the way of depth for the private cost paragraph that other than listing like all the costs of the power plant, what more can I say? Like it becomes a really silly paragraph where I go, the electricity costs and like the cost of like the staff and the rent and like what's that? Right? That's absolute nonsense. So I would not do this. If I had a 25 market and I had a choice, the other option here is way better, by the way. Like we'll deal with that later if we can, about like the impact of a monopoly on consumers, whether it's good or bad for them. But as a data response, no problemo at all. 12 marker, 8 marker, etc. Happy days. The one I want us to do is going to be from paper 3, June 2017, about Chile. So let's start. Now, the wording of the question matters, yeah? Because if it doesn't say private and external costs, and in this case it doesn't, then you don't need to define private costs and you don't need to explain what the private costs are, yeah? But if it did, you would begin with that. You go, a private cost is a cost that is internal to a transaction, yeah? You then provide me with anything in the data that clearly shows what the private cost is. So if I rewind into old specs territory, January 2013 has an extract about how they were fishing a lot of mackerel to the point where the mackerel were about to go extinct, yeah? And it was the private and external benefits of doing that. What are the private costs? Not benefits, sorry, costs, yeah? What are the private costs of fishing? Well, do you guys agree that you need to pay fishermen their salaries? You need a boat, you need bait, like fishing rods, like equipment. These are examples of private costs. And so that's the paragraph. You basically go, examples of private costs for fishing would be this. Cool. They had an extract about how they were burning down loads of rainforest in North America, and it was like, so South America, and it was like for intensive farming. What are the private costs? Well, the private cost is the machinery that I need to chop down all the trees, to burn down the rainforest. I need to pay the staff. These are private costs, yeah? External costs are the negative, third-party spillover effect arising from a private transaction. Basically, again, what are the spillovers that occur as a result of doing that thing? Now, this question is examine the likely impact of externalities of copper mining on firms and communities within Chile. Now, in truth, again, I think they should have put the word "and" in bold, because I would do it in a way where I do one paragraph about the impact on communities, another impact on firms. Now, to save time, you guys can obviously pause this when you watch it back later and read the extract fully. But the extract is all about how the copper mining process, it uses up a lot of fuel. Do you guys agree that, fuel is probably bad for the environment? So what will happen to communities? Well, higher levels of pollution. That is external cost. So you define external cost there and you go, one, external cost to communities is higher levels of pollution. Quote from the data about how, the copper mining process uses up loads of fuel, and then just briefly explain it and go that higher levels of pollution in the atmosphere is likely to result in people getting sick more often, worker productivity levels going down, and therefore the government receiving maybe less tax revenue. Yeah, or having to spend more on like the Chilean health service. Yeah, that is the first analysis. Now, firms. This is what I think is interesting because we sometimes don't think of them as firms, but they are a firm. Is if I change the I into an A, the firm, a farm. A farm is a firm, yeah? So one of the main things the extract is exploring here is the fact that the copper mining industry uses up lots and lots of water, yeah? So it talks about how they accuse them of causing water shortages. Okay, do you guys agree that farmers obviously need water? Like it's probably one of the most important things they need for their farm. And therefore, if there's water shortages as a result of the copper mining industry, then farmers are shutting down. That is clearly an external cost. And there's your analysis. You then draw the diagram. Right, let's draw the diagram together and then we'll evaluate together as well. Okay, so here's the diagram. Nope, that was not the right thing to press on. This one here. Right, add page. Right. So again, I want to run you guys through my step by step so that you know how to like construct this in the exam. Even if you get stuck, you can work it out. You can kind of ask yourself a sequence of questions that allow you to answer, that allow you to construct this. So cost/benefits, which by the way, you can abbreviate as C/B. They will not penalize you for that. All right, first question. Negative externality. Is that to do with costs or benefits? Hopefully you recognize the fact that the word negative is bad, therefore costs. So I want to, this time slightly pivoted, upward sloping cost curves like this. Yeah. If there are two upward sloping curves, it follows there must only be one downward sloping curve. So let's draw that downward sloping curve. And this is MPB equals MSB. Our benefit lines are now constant. We assume they're constant. We now go, hey, there are 2 points where they intersect. It intersects there and it intersects there. And then a dot across and a dot across. Okay? And then I go to myself, okay, a negative externality, is that where we are doing too little of something good or too much of something bad? Well, clearly negative is too much of a bad thing. Therefore, which one must be the equilibrium, number one or number two? Obviously number two. Yeah, so this is QE. This we're going to label as QSO, the social optimum. That's PSO. And this is PE. And again, I now put my pen on the equilibrium. I go, hey, that is definitely the equilibrium. I know it is. Only one line is going through it. That line must be private. It is always private. It will always be private forevermore. Yeah. So MPC. And this therefore is MSC. And finally, welfare loss. Put my pen on the equilibrium. I'm going to draw a line up. And that's what society is losing out on. Yeah. Again, the explanation of the diagram is really straightforward in the context of like the Chilean mining companies. So you basically describe the following is, as can be seen in the diagram, there is an overproduction of copper from QSO to QE units, and thus there is welfare loss that the free market fails to account for. Given this, there is market failure. Yeah. Now, I know that this diagram, I've done my diagram pivoted, and you'll see why in a moment. I do that on purpose for negative externality as well as positive. Do them as parallel. You're going to see why in a bit, yeah, but not yet. Okay, let's evaluate. There are some excellent evaluations. One of the best evaluations is to go, it is difficult to attach a monetary value to external costs. In other words, I can't really tell you if pollution is exclusively caused by the copper mining industry. There are obviously various factors behind pollution, right? Now, if I go to June 2017, paper one, that's question number 8, 25 marker. It was about imposing a tax on soft drinks like Pepsi, Coca-Cola. Okay, why are they doing it? They're obviously doing it because soft drinks are bad for your health and they've resulted in higher levels of obesity. Yeah? Does that make sense? So, what would you do? You probably like tax it and stuff like that. But before we deal with how to fix it, do you guys agree though that obesity is not exclusively caused by people drinking too much Coca-Cola and Pepsi? There are a variety of factors behind why obesity levels have gone up. One of them is what we just looked at in an extract, by the way, is Netflix, streaming services, and delivery services. Because before, at least you had to like get your backside out and go to like the cinema, right? You have to move a little bit. Now you can sit there, order Deliveroo, have like a bucket of KFC, and binge watch an entire season of like a show. Obviously, that's going to lead to obesity. In other words, the obesity crisis is not just caused by people drinking too much Pepsi and Coca-Cola, right? So here, when we're dealing with this, we can find any evidence in the data, ideally, but even if not, we can just kind of give examples of other reasons for the external costs. Then that helps us to justify that it's not just the copper mining industry. And there is an utterly outstanding piece of evidence in this particular data set. Because if we now go, and it's one of those things where most people would just gloss over it, they'd read it and not really absorb it well. It says the following. So when it starts talking about, the water supply is a big issue, etc., in passing, it now just says the following. A prolonged drought has not helped. What's a drought? A drought is a natural disaster. How is that the copper mining industry's fault? It's not their fault that there's a drought. In other words, yes, they have caused water shortages, but actually, a lot of the farmers potentially shutting down. It might be more to do with the drought than it is to do with them, the mining. Yeah, that is an exceptional evaluation, by the way. It works really, really well. Yeah. So that's the first evaluation. Now, the other evaluation that you could do for negative externalities like this is to basically find good things about it, because it's not all bad. You can say something along the lines of, well, actually, it's good because it creates loads of jobs in the Chilean economy. Yeah. It even speaks about how like a mining truck driver earns $70,000 a year, $10,000 more than the US equivalent. So, it's a source of jobs. In other words, if you can find good things about the thing, you can identify those and go, hey, it's not all bad. There are good things about this as well. Yeah. Is that really clear? That is positive and negative externalities. Now, let's dive into a massive topic, which is government intervention. How do we fix market failure? How do we fix negative externalities? And I want us to begin with taxation, because taxation is one of the easiest methods to fix a market failure where it's a negative externality. Yeah. So if I go back to my diagram, there are 3 different diagrams that you have a choice to choose from in your exam when you're dealing with an indirect tax, starting with this. And with this, if I place a tax on this good or service, in fact, you know what? June 2024, it's a good example. In the June 2024 paper, the 15 market is about methods of government intervention to fix the problem of electronic waste. Yeah. So it was about people basically dumping things like kettles and irons into bins rather than taking them to recycling centers. So an easy solution is let's make those things more expensive. Let's tax them. Yeah. Now, if I tax those appliances, what happens? Do you guys agree on a supply and demand diagram? Any indirect tax causes supply to shift, in the famous words of Beyonce, to the left, inwards, right? They're going to shift inwards. What is the supply curve, though, on my diagram over here? Hello, supply curve. MPC is the supply curve. And this is why I pivot it. Because when you are going to fix a market failure, I want it to be pivoted so it's more obvious that you are shifting it to the social optimum. We're going to shift it right through there. Yeah? Draw like parallel. And we're going to label it as MPC plus tax. Bear in mind, the exact same diagram would be the case if I'm doing a pollution permit. So pollution permit is the contract they give out to these firms that allow them to pollute up to a certain level, right? Well, it's exactly the same thing, same diagram. So you draw plus pollution permit. And now you can drop my favorite sentence in theme 1. I know I need to get a life, but I have a favorite sentence in theme 1. And it is the following. It goes, the effect of a tax is to internalize the external cost associated with, so if I'm doing June 2024, electronic waste. I now explain how by taxing the appliances, it makes it more expensive and the price of the appliances are likely to rise from PE to PSO, and the number of units that are consumed of this good of these goods, again contextualized, a lot of irons, kettles, fridges, etc., are likely to fall from QE to the social optimum quantity, QSO. Make sense? That is exceptional analysis. Now, if I'm dealing with it as a 15 or a 25 mark and I want more depth, no problemo. How do I offer more depth? I can throw in an incredible term, and that word is hypothecate. What does that word mean? Hypothecate is a fancy way of saying the government pledge that whatever revenue they generate on the tax, whatever they make in tax revenue, they're going to spend it back on the problem. They're going to spend it back on the market failure. And you have to, when you do this point, give me an example of what they can do. The easiest thing they can do here is run awareness campaigns. Educate people about how to recycle properly. Get them to understand how bad it is for the environment that they're throwing away these appliances into bins. Does that make sense? That is exceptional. 15 or 25 mark at that level of depth where you're drawing that diagram, shifting MPC inwards, developing it through internalizing the external cost and hypothecating it. If I'm an examiner, I'm calling my friends. We're having a party. We're celebrating. I'm framing your script. It's incredible stuff. Yeah. That is outstanding analysis. Yeah. I will deal with the other analyses in a second. Let's deal with the evaluation. There is a go-to eval. And the go-to evaluation that I always want you guys to do when it comes to indirect taxes is that indirect taxes are forevermore regressive. What does that mean? A regressive tax is one that impacts low-income households more than it impacts high-income households. Do you guys agree that if I place a £5 tax on a packet of cigarettes, a £5 tax is nothing for a multimillionaire? It's like just like nothing. Whereas £5 for someone who is on minimum wage, it's about half an hour of their salary. Do you guys agree it's therefore going to impact low-income households way more than high-income households? And I can develop that through, again, contextualization by saying, realistically, these appliances like a fridge are necessities. Like people need a fridge. So if you tax appliances like this, it's going to really, really harm low-income households. It's going to widen income inequality, and therefore it constitutes government failure. And they love government failure as an evaluation, by the way, for tax. It's such a strong eval. It is an exceptional, exceptional evaluation. And I want to make sure that you guys understand that. So that is my first evaluation pretty much all the time when I'm dealing with taxation. Yeah. Right. How else do we fix it? Or how else do we kind of draw tax diagrams? The basic supply and demand diagram tax, I have a whole video showing you step by step how to do that. Please watch that. So if you want to know how to construct the supply and demand, that. But the last diagram that we're going to do instead, especially if it's like a bigger question, like a 25 marker, is the following. And this gives you plenty of things to say. So costs slash revenue. And here it comes again. Cost and revenue diagram. Let's start off with the firm making super normal profit. MC. And then we've got AR equals D. And this is MR. And then as always, I go to profit maximization where MC equals MR. This is Q1. I go up to the demand curve. That's my price, P1. I draw my AC curve. I draw it like over here, for example. That's AC. And then we go and hit the AC curve from the dotted line Q1, go up, and that's C1. And remember to label the corners of the areas A, B, yeah? So this is in the firm initially, this is how much profit they're making. Okay, right. If now you place a tax. Now this is the thing about how to recognize whether your diagram is correct or incorrect, yeah? When you shift it, let's say hypothetically you looked at it and said, oh yeah, a tax is a fixed cost. So only AC is going to shift. Now, if I just shift AC, what you hopefully will recognize is the fact that output will not change and the prices would not change. That cannot be the answer. It can't be a fixed cost because the whole point of a tax is that it's going to cause the price to go up. We know that for sure. And the number of units that people buy will go down, right? Similarly, June 2018, paper 3, question 2B is an 8 marker about how they were building a dam and you needed to draw a cost and revenue diagram, right? And it was like, okay, so what would shift here? And the thing is that it said that it would double the harvest of rice. So you needed output to go up. And that was therefore variable costs going down, MC and AC falling. But anyway, I got on a tangent. Let's go back to this, yeah? So what do we know? A tax is going to cause the cost for the firm to go up. What kind of cost is it? It must be a variable cost. Every single unit of, let's say, like Pepsi or Coca-Cola or whatever, is now being taxed. So MC1, AC1, we're going to go up this time. So this is MC2. What do? I get my new output level. This is Q2. I then go up until I hit the demand curve. And this is the price. The price obviously has to go up, P2, yeah. And then we draw the AC curve going up. Now, you can draw them making a loss, I don't mind, or you can just draw it slightly going up. I mean, I'm going to shift it up a little bit, like here. But there's no right answer here. Like it's completely valid, whatever you had done. Q2 hits the AC curve over here. That's C2. That's D. That's E. Clearly, supernormal profits are clearly going down. Yeah. Now you have a lot to say here. Yeah. This is why this diagram is so amazing and why I think it's better than normal supply and demand. Now, if you are running short on time, trust me, you're going to get credit for a supply and demand. If you look at the exam report answer in June 2023 about government intervention to get people to go from like cars to like, trains or whatever, they do all their diagrams as like basic supply and demand diagrams. It gets 25 to 25. Yeah. You guys can do better than that, by the way. You can draw better diagrams than that. But if you're running short on time, it's okay. Yeah. Anyways, right. What can I do to develop this? Other than explaining the diagram, which actually in itself is a lot of depth, but what you can say now is when the price of this good goes up, consumers are going to switch to what? What are they going to switch to? Substitute goods that have you should hopefully know from earlier in the course, positive XCD. And then you can give an example. So, for example, if I tax soft drinks that have lots of sugar, like Pepsi and Coca-Cola, people might switch to alternatives that are sugar-free. They might switch to water. They might switch to, I don't know, fruit juices. They don't have a lot of sugar. Blah, blah, blah. Who cares? Yeah. Just give me an example, and that gives you depth. And then you can develop it beyond that and go, oh, the firms that are selling these drinks now, because their costs are going up, their sales are going down, their profits are going down. Some of them might even shut down. Oh my God, right? Sensational analysis. Let's deal with the evaluation. The evaluation is one of two things. One is PED. You can always question whether demand is likely to be inelastic or elastic. Typically, brands have very inelastic demand. Habitual behavior means demand is inelastic, right? Whatever reason you could justify for why it's elastic or inelastic, you basically provide it and then just develop it and say, hey, maybe the tax isn't going to be that effective. You're not going to see a massive reduction in the number of people buying that item because, fairly addicted, yeah? The alternative here, especially in the June 2017 paper, which I think is a really clever evaluation, is to go the impact on profitability for Pepsi and Coca-Cola depends on the XED, depends on the substitutes. What are they switching to? Well, do you guys agree that realistically, most people would probably switch from like Coca-Cola to Coke Zero or Pepsi to like Pepsi Max? And because they have really strong brand loyalty, in other words, their profits are not impacted. Because, yeah, on the one hand, there are less people buying Coca-Cola, but there'll be more people buying Coke Zero. So, therefore, because they're strong substitutes, the XCD being above one, people are going to quickly just switch over from Coca-Cola to Coke Zero. But that means their profits are unimpacted. If anything, actually, their profits could go up. Because it could be that firms that don't have like a sugar-free version of their drink, their customers now start switching over and buying Coke Zero, buying Pepsi Max. That is outstanding evaluation, yeah? And that's how you deal with it in terms of taxation, yeah? So that's our first externality that we fixed through a tax, yeah? Now, the alternative, by the way, that I could have done is rather than a tax, so let's say you had to do two forms of government intervention, it would be something like this. You can impose a minimum price. Why? What does a minimum price do? So if I draw a non-guaranteed minimum price scheme, so QP supply, S1, D1. Okay, right. So here is the equilibrium to begin with, QE, P. Right. Hopefully you all know what a minimum price is. A minimum price is a legal minimum that firms are not allowed to sell below. No one's allowed to actually reduce their price below that level. Now, it would have no impact if the price was set below the equilibrium. It has to be set above the equilibrium. So like this. So let's set it there. And this is min price. And this is P min. Okay. The most important thing to understand about this, so this is, by the way, quantity demanded. How do I know this is demand? Because can you see it? The price hits the demand curve there. This is QD. And this is where it hits the supply. So there's excess supply, yeah, of that distance there. Okay. The whole point of this, though, is that you impose a minimum price because if it's illegal for anyone to sell below P-min, the good now becomes more expensive for consumers. They therefore hopefully start switching to substitutes that are hopefully better for them than this thing, yeah? So there's a minimum price, for example, on alcohol in Scotland. That's a good example in terms of real world application. But so that's an alternative method of government intervention that you could use other than placing a tax, yeah? The other thing now, the evaluation to that is one of two things. One, again, PED works really well. So it depends on the elasticity of demand. If demand is inelastic, then even if the price goes up, there'll likely to be a less than proportionate fall in demand. People are going to continue to buy the good. There's not going to be much reduction in demand. Yeah. The alternative evaluation that you can also do for a minimum price, depending on the good though, yeah, be very sensible about this point, is that people might turn to the hidden economy. They might go and buy the illegally smuggled products, let's say alcohol in this case, or like cigarettes. That would work. Yeah. And there's a real issue with that because not only would the government lose out on revenue from the sale, like the tax revenue they could have got, they're also losing out because of the fact that those products are unregulated. So they might be even more harmful to people than normal kind of, cigarettes. And so again, that is government failure. That is an excellent evaluation as well. Yeah. So we fixed negative externalities. Let's fix positive externalities. This time, I am going to draw the subsidy diagram. Right. Let's draw it together. So, I'm going to make up an example just for you guys to understand the concept. So let's say this is like in thousands. So here is the supply and the demand, made up example of, let's say, bananas. Yeah. And this is the demand schedule. This is the supply schedule. And let's assume hypothetically the market price in the UK of a banana happens to be, I don't know, 70p. Completely making up numbers. And the number of people that are consuming bananas per year happens to be 80,000 people. Cool. Now, the government scientists do some research and they work out that, hey, do you know what? The bananas are really healthy for us. They're really good. And if more people consume bananas, it's going to result in less strain on the NHS. It's going to result in worker productivity levels going up. And they actually work out the optimal amount of bananas that we should be consuming as a kind of society. And it turns out that it's not 80,000, it's 100,000, which clearly is over here on the x-axis. Yes? Now, the government, in order for them to achieve that outcome, in order for them to incentivize people to buy that many bananas, they're going to need to work out two things. The first thing they need to work out is what would the price need to be for the consumer to want to buy that many bananas? Which curve is the consumer, supply or demand? Would you guys agree the demand curve is the consumer? So if I dot up from 100,000 there, that level tells me the price it would be for consumers to want to buy. So let's say hypothetically the consumers go, you know what, if it's 55p, we're down. We will buy 100,000 bananas. But that is not the only question the government need to work out. The other thing the government need to work out is they need to go, hey, what is the price? What does the price need to be for the supplier, the firm, the farmer to have the incentive to make that many bananas? Which curve is the producer, the farmer, obviously the supply curve. So now if I go up from 100,000, let's say here's the supply curve all the way up there. And they might turn around and say, hey, we want a price of, let's say, I don't know, £1. Yeah. Okay, so this is what the government now say to them. The government turn around to the farmers and say, okay, cool. Please sell the bananas at the price the consumers can afford and want to pay, which is the 55p, and then we will subsidize you. We will subsidize you the difference between the price you really wanted, which is £1, and the 55p you're getting from consumers, which is why the subsidy rate in my example here then is 45p. Supply is going to shift right through that exact point there. And that's why when you draw a subsidy diagram, by the way, and you place your pen on new equilibrium, and you draw a line up from that point. So if I go up like that distance, what is that distance? That distance is the 45p. It's the subsidy rate. And that's why when you border off this area, that entire area is government spending. The government is spending all of that amount on the subsidy. Does that make sense? June 2017, paper one, I think it's question 2 or 3, I think it's number 3. It's about like gas cylinders in India. And you're expected to work out the amount of money the government is spending on the subsidy. Yeah. You need to do it that way. You put your pen on the equilibrium, go up to the old supply curve, go across, go across. The width of the area is the quantity they need to subsidize. So my example here, by the way, they're going to subsidize 100,000 units at 45p. Every single banana that farmers sell, they're going to sell and get an extra 45p on top of it. So the government, we can work out how much money they make. It would basically be 45p multiplied by 100,000. Hopefully, if my maths is not horrendous, I think that's £45,000, but maybe that's wrong. Yeah, but whatever, right? Is that really clear? That's how you basically deal with a question like that. Now, why is that important to start off with? Because if I now scroll down over here and remind you guys of a diagram we have already drawn earlier today. The diagram we drew earlier today was a positive externality. So we have quantity, cost/benefits. Again, positive externalities go like this. 2 downward sloping lines, 1, 2, because they're benefit lines, and then 1 upward sloping line like this, yeah? And we can label that upward sloping line immediately because it's going to be a cost line. So MPC equals MSC. Same exercise as always. I go dot down from the 2 points of intersection. And then I say to myself, I go, okay, are we doing too little or too much of this thing? Well, we're doing too much of a good thing. Sorry, too little of a good thing. We're not doing enough, yeah? This is therefore QE. This is therefore QSO. That's social optimum. That's PE. And that's PSO, yeah? Okay, now I know that's equilibrium. That must be MPB. This is therefore MSB. And then finally, the triangle is this over here, yeah? That's potential welfare gain. Let's do it over here. Okay. We're now the government. And we want to fix this market failure. So do you guys agree that if something is underconsumed, what I want to make sure I do is I want to make it as affordable as possible and get as many people to buy the good, yeah? So how do I do that? Well, I clearly subsidize. And the diagram I just showed you a second ago, supply was shifting outwards, right? What is supply on an externality diagram? It's MPC. In the same way that MPC shifted inwards for a tax, it's going to shift outwards for a subsidy, yeah? And there's a very specific point that you need to shift it to. What you say to yourself is, I want to achieve this quantity. I want to get to social optimum. So if I go up from there until I hit the demand curve, which is MPB, see that point there? That point there is the exact point where on the diagram above, it was the price that consumers said, yeah, you know what, I'll be able to afford it if it's at this price. And therefore, supply, as it did a second ago on my diagram, is going to shift right through that point. And that is MPC plus subsidy. And the new price, by the way, MPC equals MPB, is now here. All right, what will happen? Now, I know the triangle looks like it's still there. It's not though, because we're now operating at social optimum. Now, just to understand what this meant in terms of the example I gave you guys a second ago, yeah? The example I gave a second ago, the equilibrium quantity of 80,000, do you guys agree was there? That was the number of bananas that were being consumed. What was the 100,000? The 100,000 was the social optimum. That is what we wanted to achieve. In my example, I think I said it was like 70p. I don't know, maybe I changed the numbers, 70p, 75p, whatever it was, yeah? That was the equilibrium price to begin with. What is P2? That's the price the consumers can afford to pay. The 55p, they were like, you know what? I'll buy it if it's at 55p. And therefore, what is PSO? PSO in this example is the £1 that the farmer wanted in order for them to have the incentive to go and make that good. That is why if you go to the social optimum and you go up to the demand curve, you shift your supply curve, your MPC through that point, you have now fixed the market failure. And so if we're dealing with positive externalities and how we're able to correct market failure, what do? We basically now turn around and say, subsidize the good. By subsidizing the good, you can go from the equilibrium to the social optimum. And now you can talk about all the benefits the society gets from, more people, for example, going to university, using electric cars, having healthy fruit, blah, 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 blah. Any of those are all now entirely valid and you can develop in loads of detail. Yeah. Right. We'll do the evaluations in a second. What would I do if I got a 25 marker just on subsidies? So this would definitely be one of my paragraphs in terms of the effect it has like on wider society and why it's good for society. Cost and revenue. You've already drawn it with me today. Do you guys agree that variable costs for the firms are going to go down? They're going to decrease because every single unit is being subsidized by the government. MC and AC, down. You draw it, summarize it, go wild, go crazy, right? You could talk about how the subsidy, because the prices are going down, will incentivize people to switch away from substitute goods that have a positive XCD towards the good being subsidized. Does that make sense? You have loads of points that overlap and just keep coming up over and over again. Yeah. Evaluations. Now, one of the problems with subsidies is that it can create a dependency culture. The firms being subsidized, they could easily develop this expectation they're going to keep being subsidized, and therefore they can start to prioritize quantity over the quality. And that's a real problem. Now you can develop that again in like a bigger question with like the fact that they might become X inefficient. Yeah. They might end up basically incurring unnecessary costs because of the lack of competition, because the government keeps subsidizing them. Yeah. So that is the first evaluation. Second evaluation is when you talked about people switching to, say, away from substitutes towards that good. Well, question how strongly or weakly related they are. It may be that the XCD between these goods is less than one. They might be weak substitutes. Yeah. A good example that you could basically always talk about, let's say it was like electric cars versus petrol cars. Yeah. The reason I would argue that the XCD for petrol and electric cars to begin with is fairly inelastic and they're weak substitutes, especially in dense areas like densely populated areas like London, is do you guys agree that most people do not have a driveway, or a lot of people don't have a driveway? And so if you don't have a driveway, are you able to regularly charge your electric car? Well, the answer is obviously no. Therefore, even if the price of electric cars suddenly became cheaper and you want to buy an electric car, the logistics means that you can't. You need to be able to drive charge it on a regular basis. And if you can't do that, you're probably not going to switch to buying an electric car. Yeah. So that is the kind of evaluations that you're going to be exploring for subsidies. Yeah. Okay. Let's deal with a couple of questions from the most disgusting paper they have ever sent. Now, I genuinely think, by the way, I don't have any inside knowledge about this, but this was one of the COVID years, November 2021. They knew in advance that hardly anyone was going to be sitting that exam. And honestly, no joke, I genuinely think that they decided to just do some experimental questions and like essentially just like mess with you. Yeah. There's a bit of an issue with my TikTok. Those of you that are on TikTok, I don't know if it's still on there, but my phone is overheating. Just give me one sec. I'm just gonna charge it, see if that helps. All right. Well, apparently my phone is saying that it's overheated and therefore I think my TikTok live is not live anymore. But if it is live, can someone please just let them know that to go on YouTube? That's where it's at. I'll carry on over here. Yeah. So let's carry on. So in the 2021 paper, they threw out some absolutely vulgar questions at you guys, and I genuinely think to a large extent it was them telling test centers that we are able to ask this. We'd never asked it before, but we're able to ask these type of questions. So be ready for it. Yeah. So let's be ready for it. And we're going to begin with the 8 marker. 8 markers are normally quite nice or not too bad. This is a horrific 8 marker, and you're going to see why in a moment. So let's go to paper 1 and the 8 marker. Oh, my phone is back, so let's see if we can go back on live while my laptop is also being super slow. Okay, so at Excel, paper 1. Oh, no, I'm watching a video about Ahmad Diallo. How do I go live? There we go, live. Right. Oh, why's it gone back here? Right, go live. Resume. Okay. So paper 1, right, we're back. Those of you on TikTok, I highly recommend, by the way, those of you on TikTok, you really should get onto YouTube. Like on YouTube, you can see me sharing my screen, you can see my board. My phone overheated, and so like the stream died. Right, so November 2021, absolutely disgusting. Yeah, has the following question. The 8 marker says, examine the likely impact of Thomas Cook's plan to reduce their airline emissions on the social optimum position. Use an appropriate externalities diagram in your answer. Okay, shall we deal with it? So I want us to quickly just look at the data. Now, you know what, can I summarize the data for you guys? Essentially, Thomas Cook was switching from like more harmful engines to like more environmentally engines. Yeah, they were becoming more kind of environmentally conscious. Yeah. Okay. And the thing is that typically when we draw negative externalities and we're fixing a market failure, we would draw it how I drew it earlier, where MPC is shifting inwards. This, it doesn't work. It is not what needs to happen here, and I want to explain why, and then we can move on to other topics. So just do the following. So negative externality. Now, do you guys agree that obviously airline emissions are bad? Like, you know, when a plane lifts off into the sky, it's really bad in terms of pollution and all of that, right? So negative externality, two slightly pivoted upward sloping lines. They can be parallel here. I have no issue, by the way. It doesn't make a difference to this answer. And then one downward sloping line. And this is MPB equals MSB. Yeah. And then we go dot down, and across. Right. A negative externality, again, is where we are doing too much of a bad thing. So this must be the equilibrium. This is QE. This is QSO. That's PSO. And that's PE. Yeah. Okay. Again, I know the equilibrium is there. Therefore, this is MPC. And this is therefore MSC. Now, you're going to tell, you can tell in a moment that this is a disgusting question because normally I'd be shading in my welfare loss triangle. We ain't shading. We're going to give it letters, and you're going to see why in a moment. So I'm going to go A, B, C. So the welfare loss triangle to begin with is A, B, C. Yeah? Okay. What do we know mathematically about marginal social cost? So MSC. What is it equal to? Well, marginal social cost, the cost to society, yeah, is made up of two parts. The first is, do you guys agree the individual, for example, someone who smokes a cigarette, or in this case, Thomas Cook sending out a flight into the air, they're part of society, right? So the first thing it's made up of is the marginal private cost, MPC. But there is an additional thing that you need to add. When someone smokes a cigarette or they consume something that's bad, do you agree there is an external cost? And therefore it is MEC, the marginal external cost. Now, this is why this is a weird question. Because normally it would be the MPC is shifting. For example, like, you know, a tax causes it to shift inwards, subsidy causes it to shift outwards. In this case, though, the only context we're given is we don't know if the engines they're switching over to are cheaper or more expensive. All we know is that those engines are better for the environment. Therefore, if I now send a flight, let's say from London to New York, and it was emitting the equivalent of 100 units of like, you know, toxic waste. And now the same flight is going from London to New York, but it only emits 80 units of toxic waste. What's falling? Do you guys agree that MEC is going down? The external cost is lower. And if MEC is falling, MSC for the first time ever is shifting. Yeah, they had never shifted MSC before. If I go back all the way to 2008 until that year, they'd never done this before. But now they've done it once, they can do it again. But hopefully that makes sense for you to recognize the fact that actually the external cost falling causes MSC to shift, not MPC. MSC is going to shift down, which is to the right. Yeah. And this is MSC 2. Now, there's a couple of things to recognize. The first thing to recognize is the fact that the equilibrium is still there because MPC still equals MPB there. So the amount of flights they're sending out haven't changed. But what has changed is the social optimum. The social optimum quantity is always where social cost equals social benefit. So if I dot down, that's QSO2. And I go across, that's PSO2. Final thing, and then I'll explain all of this, is how do we get the welfare loss triangle? Well, we place our pen on the equilibrium, so the equilibrium is still there. And then we go up to the social cost curve. Well, it hits it there now. Can you see it's a smaller triangle? So I'm going to label that as like D, and that is E. Yeah, so the triangle, the welfare loss triangle, is going down from ABC to DEC. Can you guys all see that? Weird question, right? Just to make a bit more sense of that. So essentially, imagine I told you that the number of flights that Thomas Cook send out on a weekly basis happen to be 10 flights, or maybe daily, I don't know, whatever, yeah? So that's the amount of flights they sent out. Now, on the old engines that they were using, because it was so bad for the environment, we only wanted them to send out 6 flights. That was the social optimum. That was the ideal number of flights that we wanted them to send out. Now, though, because the engines they're switching over to are more environmentally friendly, we could, you know what? Even if you send out more flights, it's not impacting society as badly because it's not as bad for the environment. The optimum now is like 8. So what happened? There's still welfare loss and there's still an overproduction, but it's not as big an overproduction as it was initially when they had the bad engines. Crazy weird question. Yeah. Last crazy weird one. And then I promise we'll move on from externalities and do other things as well. Yeah. Just want to make sure that you guys are really comfortable correcting market failure and government intervention and stuff like that. It was actually another code video. It was October 2020. Yeah. Without opening the paper, can I just tell you guys? So the 25 marker was about how there was a projection about how people were going to start switching from petrol cars towards electric vehicles. Yeah. More and more people were buying electric vehicles. Okay. Now, there are 2 ways that I can deal with this. Either I can do it from the perspective of negative externalities, like, for example, in this case, like petrol cars, right? Or I can do it from the perspective of positive externalities, like electric cars, right? Let's do it as a negative externality. I'm going to undo quite a few things to get rid of the extra stuff we have here. Right, cool, right. Again, this is a bit weird because if it's just saying that people are switching over from petrol to electric cars, it doesn't tell us that the cost of buying a petrol car is higher. It doesn't tell us that taxes have gone up. There's nothing actually causing MPC to shift. All we know is that the number of people buying petrol cars is decreasing. What is that? That's a shift of demand. Now I could draw a simple supply and demand diagram, but you guys are way better than that. You're better than drawing a supply and demand diagram. What you go is MPB is demand. And therefore MPB is shifting inwards. And I'm going to shift it inwards. Not all the way to social optimum. I'm going to just shift it somewhere over here. Yeah. And this is MPB 2. Now, where is the equilibrium? Well, the equilibrium is here. This is Q2, let's call it. Yeah. And the price, of course, is going down because less people are buying petrol cars, P2. But the main thing to focus on here, by the way, is the fact that we're getting closer to social optimum. Yeah. So do you guys agree the overproduction or overconsumption of petrol cars to begin with was that distance QSO QE? Now it's just this distance Q2 QSO. Yeah. In other words, the welfare loss triangle is going down. In other words, the market failure is being corrected. It's good. There's less strain on the NHS. Go mental. Yeah. Those are your externality diagrams, of government intervention in a nutshell, and we are done with that. Some of you have asked about how long this stream is going on for. Those of you that have seen this stream before, I don't know. I haven't got a clue. I'm going to keep going until my throat gives up on me. It is dying, but let's go. Your exam is on Monday, yeah? Lock in. Let's go crazy, yeah? I bought a whole massive bottle of like Lucozade. It's like absolutely, I know it's very god, it's like Lucozade pink, but like I'm about halfway through it. But okay, ready? There's another disgusting question that I want to quickly talk about out loud in that paper, and then we can move on to other topics, which is the 10 marker. 10 marker, it's just proper unnecessary, was the following. It said, with reference to extract C, assess whether Thomas Cook's failure was caused by the principal agent problem. Yikes, yeah? Okay, let's revise. What is the principal agent problem? So firstly, to understand this, we need to go back to what we assume most firms want to maximize. Most firms would want to maximize supernormal profits, yeah? But sometimes when a firm gets bigger and bigger and bigger, what ends up typically happening is you have a divorce of ownership, yeah? The people who are running the business on a day-to-day basis are no longer the founders. They're no longer the people that set up the business. And therefore, you get the principal agent problem. The objectives of the principal which are the shareholders, would obviously to be maximizing profits because their dividends depend on the amount of profits being generated. But those objectives may not be shared by the agents, the managers who they hire to run the business on their behalf, because often your salary is not linked to the amount of profit being generated. You don't normally have shares in the business, right? So what ends up typically happening is the profit satisfies, which is the idea that you make enough profit to satisfy shareholders, but you don't maximize profits. But to be clear, the principal agent problem doesn't necessarily lead or need to lead to profit satisficing. It could mean that you could do anything else but profit maximize. You could decide to maximize revenue. You could decide to maximize sales. You can maximize, I don't know, like your like image in terms of like switching to like environmentally friendly engines. I don't know, whatever, right? But essentially anything except maximizing profit. Cool? Because from your perspective, why? You don't gain anything by maximizing profit. In other words, if I can find any evidence that the people who are running Thomas Cook on a day-to-day basis, they mismanaged it and prioritized other things than maximizing profit. In this case, they were prioritizing expansion. They were trying to grow the business and therefore ended up merging with a company called MyTravel, and it was a full-on disaster. It was so bad, yeah? And so what that translated into is they ended up shutting down. They made a loss of 1.5 billion, yeah? So that is it. Now, just really quickly, by the way, in terms of 10 markers, unless it says specifically two factors, two reasons, or gives like one player and another player, one analysis and one evaluation is more than enough to get you the 10 marks, yeah? So me explaining the principal agent problem and me contextualizing the principal agent problem to basically show that, hey, look, they prioritize this rather than maximizing profits, expansion, and it was a disaster because they merged with this company and they shut down as a result. That's the answer. That's the analysis, yeah? It will work all the time, yeah? How do you evaluate it? Well, the evaluation here, which I think is really good, is to say it probably isn't this. And the reason why it's probably not this is because the CEO, who in this case is a manager, he's an agent, yeah, he's the person that's like running the show. The extract literally says that something like £4 million worth of his salary is paid in stocks. In other words, it makes sense for him to want to maximize profits because he's going to lose out, and he does end up losing out on massive amounts of money. So there you go. Around 4 million of this was in the form of shares. The share price reached £1.46 in 2018, but each share is now worthless. So you can question whether it's you go, look, it's just they were unlucky. Yeah. They tried to run the company as best as they could, but it was a combination of things. I think the extract even talks about how like Brexit uncertainty, internet revolution on holiday booking, all of these things like it was the perfect storm, and therefore they shut down not because of the principal agent problem, but realistically just they were a bit unlucky, yeah. But in particular, the point there is to say that he owns shares, and so actually he obviously would want to maximize profits. He would have the incentive to maximize profits, yeah. Is that really clear? Hopefully that's a clear explanation of that. Let's deal with another topic that has not been asked since 2023, I believe. Price discrimination. So, I want to talk about price discrimination. I want to draw the diagram. And there are three types of questions they can ask about price discrimination. Still with all three of them. So, right. Price discrimination is where a firm is going to be charging different consumers different prices for the exact same good or service. Yeah. So, an example would be if we go to the cinema, you guys are going to be charged a lower price to watch the movie than I am because I'm an adult and you guys are students. Therefore, what is the assumption they have? Well, they assume that they can break the market up into sub-markets, and those sub-markets have different PEDs. My demand is likely to be more inelastic. I'm more likely to have an income, whereas you guys, you're relying on pocket money, you're relying on maybe like a part-time job, and therefore your demand is far more elastic. So how do they entice you to go to the cinema? Well, they give you a lower price. They go, listen, here's a lower price, come to the cinema. Yeah? Okay, so I want us to go through the diagram first because there's a lot of misconceptions about the diagram, but the edXL are very lenient here in terms of what the diagram will show and like what it's like kind of illustrating. So I have a video on this, but quickly revise it in case you guys haven't seen the video. So we're going to draw three axes side by side. Have fun. Okay, so one, two. I mean, I've really not given myself much space, but we'll make it work. Yeah. One, two, three. Yeah. And I'm going to do it from the perspective of the specimen paper, where it was about a cinema called Cineworld. Yeah. So over here, so this is cost slash revenue, cost slash revenue, cost slash revenue, quantity, quantity, quantity. Okay. So Cineworld are going to be over here. And then we've got the two sub-markets. So students over here and then adults over here. Yeah. Okay, right. So I want us to begin with the following assumption, and it's a very fair assumption. The assumption is that the marginal cost of providing a seat, so how much it costs the cinema to, for example, let's say like clean up the seat after the cinema is finished. Do you guys agree it's the same if I'm sitting in the seat or you're sitting in the seat? It's exactly the same cost. Therefore, we can assume the marginal cost is constant between the submarkets. And I want you to also set it equal to AC, which just makes your life a lot easier. So I'm going to pick a random point like here, and I'm going to go MC equals AC, MC equals AC, and then MC equals AC, yeah? And by the way, in section A, they could very easily ask you a question where they give you like a two submarkets. And in order for you to work out like the output and the price that the firms are charging, the submarkets, you need to understand the MC curve is constant between the submarkets, yeah? June 2017, Unit 3, old spec, question number, I think 5, yeah? Do that later. But anyways, right. Let's start with Cineworld. Now, I want you guys to do a slightly more sophisticated diagram, but if you don't remember this and you just do it as a straight line, I do not mind, yeah? But I normally get my students to start off at a really high point on the y-axis. And the idea is that when the price is really high, demand is likely to be very inelastic because only the adults can afford to go to the cinema. So let's just like start off the really inelastic demand curve like there. Yeah. And then at a random point, whatever price it is, like over here, now do you guys agree the price is low enough that the students can actually enter the market? They can afford to go to the cinema. So the shape of the demand curve is going to change. It's going to become more elastic. So it's going to now go like that. And that's AR, which is equal to D. MR is half the slope, so it's not going to look too pretty over here, but we'll make it work. Oh, that is not what I wanted to happen. Ugh, technology. There we go. Right, MR. And then I say to myself, profit maximization is where MC equals MR. That I'm going to label as QE, and that I'm going to label as PE. And I'll explain what this shows in a second. So that's the amount of supernormal profits that Cineworld are going to be making, yeah? Okay. Then we deal with the two submarkets, and this is where the diagram becomes really straightforward, yeah? Which is that demand amongst adults we know is inelastic, yeah? They have an income, they're more likely to be less sensitive to price changes. So do you see where I started on the y-axis over there? I want you to start on the same point on the diagram and make it fairly inelastic. So if I do this as AR, and MR is like this, yeah? Okay. And then I say to myself, profit maximization is where MC is equal to MR. So that's how many units they're selling to the adult market. And the price is up here. Now, I could write P2, but I want you guys to be ultra nerds, yeah? Because if they're giving you a 15 or 12 marker on price discrimination, invariably, there will be a figure. And if I show you guys, for example, the specimen paper, I mean, June 2023 is also an option, by the way. They ask the same question, shows you how repetitive questions are, by the way. If my laptop can try and speed up, that would be fantastic. It's being so slow today. Here we go. Specimen paper. And there's an extract. The paper will open. That would really help us. Like, technology is really, really slow today. Basically, it was about Cineworld and how they were going to price discriminate, yeah? Okay, here we go. So let's go to the extract. Aha! Here we go, right? Because if I look at the figure, oh, I always do this. This is getting annoying now. I keep rotating it, yeah, rather than zooming in. If I look at the figure, I know the adult tickets, and let me write it down. Adult is equal to £9.60. And the student one is £7.30. Lovely. And I go back to my diagram. And I go, hey, examiner, look at my diagram. My diagram, I'm not going to write P2 like a basic person like that. My diagram, I'm going to apply twice. Apply because this is application in itself, and I'm applying because I'm giving you numbers. £9.60, mate. Have some of that. And then I go, the students are likely to be elastic in demand. Do you see where I kink the demand curve over there? Start at the same point over there and make it really elastic, yeah? So this is AR, which is equal to D, and this is MR, yeah? Profit maximization, MC equals MR, that's Q1, and then I go up, and I ain't writing P1, no. I'm going to go £7.30, okay? And then again, shading the supernal profit, right? So that's also supernal profit. Right, there's a lot of debate about what this diagram actually shows, and Edexcel are very lenient in terms of what you explain it through, yeah? The way that I explain it, and the way that it makes sense to me, is that the third market, this one, the third diagram, Cineworld, is what profit, the amount of profit Cineworld would have generated if they had set one universal price. In other words, if they charge the same price to enter the cinema for students and for adults, this would be the price that PE, yes, that's an E, yeah, and this is the amount of profits they would generate. Clearly, that is less than how much profit they generate by separating the market into sub-markets and extracting as much revenue as they possibly can from each of the sub-markets, yeah? So by charging students a lower price, they're going to get a more than proportionate increase in demand and therefore higher revenue. By charging adults a higher price, it results in a less than proportionate fall in demand and therefore higher revenue. This therefore translates into higher profits for Cineworld. In other words, by separating the market, this plus that is greater than the amount of profit you generate by not price discriminating. Yeah. Now, if you've been taught this slightly differently, I don't mind, by the way. If you're taught like, the third diagram is the sum of the two, also valid. They are very lenient when it comes to this, as long as you're trying to just, explain the diagram as best as possible, yeah? Okay, right. Now that we know the theory and we know the diagram, three types of questions. Question number one. Question number one is a 12 marker in the specimen paper and it's repeated as the 2023 15 marker. Is the impact on a firm's profits of price discriminating? This is how we answer it. Now, it is important to understand, by the way, that 15 markers, I always prefer you guys to be doing two analyses and two evaluations. However, examiners are repeatedly told that for the entirety of section B, unless it is explicitly stated that you need to do two factors, or it says like or they give you two players to talk about, you are able to enter the top level and get full marks by doing one detailed analysis and one detailed eval. Now, I do not really normally want you guys to just do one-on-one for a 15 marker. However, this is an example of one where there's really nothing to say. What you're just going to do is develop that one paragraph in detail, as much detail as you can give me, yeah? So the overarching point for that question about, Netflix, for example, is that one likely impact of price discrimination for a firm such as Netflix is higher profits, yeah? I then now zoom in and I go, this is because by separating the market into submarkets, they are able to generate more revenue from each submarket and therefore increase their profits. You now explain why the demand amongst adults is elastic. You'd say things like demand amongst adults is likely to be, so not adults, as students, is likely to be elastic. Demand among students is likely to be elastic because of the fact that they are likely to be on limited income and pocket money and blah, blah, blah. And therefore, the Cineworld know that, or Netflix know that by reducing the price, it would lead to a more than proportionate rise in demand and therefore higher revenue for the firm. At the same time, the demand amongst adults is likely to be inelastic. Justify why, explain, and then go, oh, when they raise the price, it's going to lead to a less than proportionate fall in the demand for Netflix. Yeah? Make sense? Then you draw the diagram, you summarize the diagram. There's nothing more to say. Now, because I'm doing one analysis, I'm like, I want to extend it as much as I can. Let's drag it out a little bit. Because what you can now say is that the extra profits that they make can be invested into the newest technology. Yeah. So if I'm dealing with like Cineworld, it could be like better cinema screens, more comfy seats. Give examples, right? If I'm dealing with Netflix, they could basically have better shows, improve the quality of their shows. The extract even talks about how people felt it wasn't good value for money. You can quote it and go, they can fix that problem. They can improve the quality of their shows, and more customers might start switching back to them from Disney Plus. You could drag that out a little bit, right? But the ultimate point simply is that profits are going to go up when you price discriminate. Every time, always, yeah? Let's evaluate. Two evaluations. The first sensational evaluation is, in fact, actually, I'm going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you yet, because I want to show you something. I want to show you guys that in the questions that you guys get in your exam, there are so often clues in the paper. And if you can see the clues, it will allow you to work out points. Yeah, it's probably open somewhere over here, but I don't know which one it is. Should I open it again? So we're going to open 2023. Yeah, I've probably opened it already, but let's reopen it. Okay. So 2023. Let's have a look. If it will load sometime this millennium, that would be fantastic. Come on. Why is it so slow today? It's normally a lot better than this. Right, here is the 15 marker, yeah? So the 15 marker is using examples from figure 2 or extract B. Discuss the likely impact on price discrimination on a firm's profits. Use the relevant diagram to put your answer. Obviously, the diagram is the price discrimination diagram, yeah? The clue is the question we did right at the beginning of the stream, the 8 marker. The A marker was getting us to think about the concept of substitutes and the idea that there are possibly substitutes to Netflix now in the market, right? Therefore, the first evaluation that is absolutely outstanding here is to say to yourself, the demand amongst adults may not be inelastic. Actually, the demand may become more elastic. There are substitutes. And if there are substitutes, when they charge the higher price Netflix, more of their customers, the adults, might start switching over to Disney Plus. And therefore, rather than generating more revenue, their revenue might fall. Rather than generating more profit, their profit might go down. That applies, by the way, to the Netflix question over here, but it applies to the Cineworld example as well, because what is a substitute to cinema? It's it's basically Netflix and like streaming services. Make sense? In other words, if you can provide me with a substitute to the good, you can argue that the demand amongst adults is not as inelastic as we pretended it was. Yeah, that is outstanding evaluation, by the way. Second evaluation that always works is that there is a cost involved in policing the scheme to try and ensure the markets remain separate and there's no seepage. Basically, like there's no infiltration between the submarkets. Yeah. What you need to basically do is police it. So therefore, the cinema have to hire workers to check tickets. That's an added cost, right? The Netflix, to try and prevent people from sharing passwords, they had to invest loads of money into like a whole system to try and track IP addresses. You could basically quote that and say, Is it worth it? The extra cost that you incur as a result of policing the scheme may offset the extra revenue that you gain from price discriminating, and therefore they cancel each other out. Yeah. In other words, profits may not necessarily go up. Yeah. That is outstanding evaluation that will work always. Yeah. That is the first type of question that you can get about price discrimination. Second type of question that you can get about price discrimination, October 2020. October 2020 has the following question. Oh, it loaded fast for once. Here we go. October 2020 has a 15 marker which says, discuss the likely benefits of price discrimination to rail passengers. Use a diagram to support your answer. Let's do it together, right? So our starting point is to go, okay, who is it good for? Well, obviously, one of the rail passengers that it's good for is the elastic market, in this case, the students, right? So it shows you the price the students pay, young persons, they call them, yeah? It's £69.50. So you go, one benefit to young persons of price discrimination is that allocative efficiency rises or consumer surplus increases or they get lower prices. Any of them are valid, right? Now, how do we develop that in a bit more detail? The way we develop it in more detail is by saying that price discrimination allows the firm, the rail company, to charge lower prices for young persons of £69.50. And this is highly beneficial because it means that those people are going to be more geographically mobile. Do you agree that you can now move from, let's say, in this case, Edinburgh to Leeds or Leeds to Edinburgh more quickly and more easily because it's cheaper for you to afford like a rail card or like the ticket, right? Within that, by the way, you can develop it and talk about how the age group is 16 to 25. A lot of people graduate at the age of like 21. So it's really helpful. For the first couple of years, you probably aren't earning crazy amounts of money. And therefore, you probably can't afford to live in like, London as an example, right? So you now, because rail travel is it's cheaper, you live outside London, but you can travel into London. In other words, labor is geographically mobile. That is clearly a benefit to the individuals that are getting access to train services at a lower price. It's analysis. Eval. Who's it bad for? It's bad for the adults, right? And it's really bad in particular because adults, not all adults are likely to have a high income or any income at all. And so suddenly now you're pricing them out. And what makes it worse is you can argue that trains are an inferior good. So they don't even have like a viable substitute that they can turn to. They probably can't afford to buy a car. So you're suddenly making those people, it's very difficult for them now to take up jobs or to be mobile. And so it could widen income inequality. Yeah. So it's really bad for rail passengers, adults, who actually may not have a higher income. Does that make sense? That is the first analysis and first evaluation. At that point, most people get stuck. They go, how do I like do the second analysis? You say to yourself, if I can find a benefit to the firm and they can invest the profits, do you guys agree that they're going to benefit consumers? Well, do they make more profit? Well, yeah, we just did a whole 15 marker on it. You don't have to go into the same level of depth now. You explain briefly because we don't have enough time to develop it in the same way that I just did. You go, hey, price discrimination and separating the market into adults and young persons will allow the rail company to generate more profit. What can they do with the profit? They can invest it into new technology. For example, they can improve their train services. They can become more reliable. They can provide Wi-Fi on their trains. Don't go crazy. Give me like one or two examples. And then you go, this therefore increases dynamic efficiency and it benefits consumers. Rail passengers benefit because the service is better. Eval. Are they guaranteed to make more profit? No, they're not guaranteed to make more profit because there's a cost involved in actually policing the scheme. You have to monitor and make sure that the people are buying the right tickets. And the reason why seepage, which is infiltration between submarkets, is likely to occur is most people buy their tickets how? Online. Yeah? Do you guys agree that if let's say I call one of you guys up and I go, hey, listen, I'm making the journey from Edinburgh to Leeds on next week, and I really appreciate you telling me, like, your student ID code, yeah? I write in. It's not like the webcam turns on that, oh, you're not, Liam or whatever, right? They don't know. And therefore, they have to now pay to get ticket inspectors to keep checking tickets. But the extra cost involved in doing that might offset the extra revenue they gained from price discriminating. Sensational evaluation. And therefore, the quality might actually go down, not up, yeah, for consumers. That's the second type of question that we can get. Let's go and deal with the last question they can ever ask. They've not asked this in a very long time. The last time it was asked is the paper I'm about to show you. Unit 3, June 2014. Okay? Which is the following. Right, need to get some energy. So let's get some Lucozade into our system. Right, so let's go. If we go to question 10C. Question 10C says the following. 10C goes, to what extent is price discrimination possible for firms selling products both on the internet and in high street shops? So, to be clear, the three types of questions are as follows. One is what is the impact on profitability? Two, what is the benefit or what is the effect on the consumers of price discrimination? And the last type of question is, Can they price discriminate? Is it possible to price discriminate? Yeah. There are three criteria that need to be satisfied. And this is how you basically develop your analysis. Number one is the firm must have a degree of monopoly power. Now, to be clear, monopoly power does not necessarily mean that they're a monopoly. Monopoly power just means price setting ability. The more market share I have, the more monopoly power I have. If I go back to the example of the cinema market, do you guys agree the cinema market is dominated by two or three big firms? View and Odeon alone make up nearly half the market, possibly more than it. Yeah. Therefore, do they have the ability to set prices? Well, obviously they have monopoly power. Can they therefore price discriminate? Yeah, they can. So if I'm looking for evidence of monopoly power in an extract, I'm looking for things like, are they a recognized brand? Are they a company that have brand loyalty? Are they a company that have been around for maybe a long time? Yeah. And the extract is littered with examples here. Yeah. Now, you may or not know who this company is. They don't exist anymore, as far as I'm aware. Jessup's, yeah, is a camera company. And actually, the first thing I wanted to point out to you is this guy. Yeah. Hopefully, a lot of you might recognize him. And even if you don't recognize him, it says it in like the first sentence of the extract anyway. He is Peter Jones from Dragon's Den. Yeah. So if you ever watch Dragon's Den, there's like the show where they go and like pitch their business and go, hey, I want, £100,000 in return for 10% of my business, blah, 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 right? Anyways, the point is that he is Peter Jones, and we'll talk about why it's important to know who he is. It says it here, one of Britain's best known entrepreneurs. So we're looking for reasons for why Jessops have brand loyalty. Number one, they were established in 1935. Okay, they've been around for a long time, yeah? At one point, Peter Jones describes them as a iconic British brand. I can't remember exactly where it says it in the extract. I'm trying to remember where it says it. Here we go. Jessops is an iconic British brand, which can lead the retail blah, blah, right? So iconic British brand, now that probably suggests that they are known and therefore brand loyalty is pretty high, yeah? Other things that it says in the extract. It says they're expected to take 15% of the single lens reflex market. Where is that in the extract? So I haven't seen this extract for a while. I'm just doing this off memory. Oh, there we go. They're expected to take 15% of the digital lens. Basically, is that a small or large market share? I don't even know what a digital single lens reflex market means. Who cares? It's 15% of it. They're nearly a monopoly. Can they set prices? Hell yeah, they can set prices. Therefore, can they price discriminate? Yes, they can, of course, price discriminate. So that's analysis. We'll deal with evaluations in a second, by the way. Second analysis is the second condition. Let's do two and three together, yeah? The second thing is that you need to be able to separate the market into sub-markets, and the sub-markets need to have different PEDs. If you and I had the same PED for going to the cinema, it would not make sense for them to charge us a different price. They need to be able to separate the market into elastic and inelastic, yeah? In this case, the one that comes in clutch always is students and adults. Always, yeah? You can offer a student discount. And the third is that they need to be able to police the scheme. And the cost of policing it must be lower than the additional profit they gain from price discriminating. In other words, it needs to be something pretty easy to police. If it's super costly, let's say hypothetically they had to invest in some like laser eye technology to detect that your actual age is the age that you're claiming it is, yeah? Is it worth it to like get a couple of extra pounds of revenue? Of course not, right? So in this case, I'm going to combine two and three together. Can they separate the market to sub-markets? Well, yeah, they can. They can separate the market. Now, there's two ways of separating it that are really clever here. Either students and adults, very valid, and talk about how adults are inelastic, students are elastic, right? And you can draw the diagram as well at that point, right? Or the alternative is to go and basically talk about it in terms of online versus in-store. Yeah, so like on the internet versus high street shops. Now, online, do you guys agree demand is far more elastic? And the reason why demand is far more elastic is because you can easily compare prices of different cameras. You can go to like different websites. Like it's a click of a button. Whereas in store, when you've made the journey there and you're in the shop, the effort of having to go and walk to another place or like travel to another destination where there's a camera shop, it's probably more inelastic. Yeah. So either way, that and now in terms of the student one, like how they can enforce it, how they enforce it, they just get you to present your ID, and that's the easiest way for them to check that the person buying the camera is actually a student. Does that make sense? Right. So our analysis would basically be those two things about they have monopoly power and they can easily separate the market into sub-markets with different PEDs. Eval, number one. Number one is, hey, you know what? There's going to be seepage here. Profits might go down if they do this. And the reason why is because people can buy these cameras online. And if they can buy them online, they could basically use someone's student discount, even they're not entitled to it. Your parents could use your student discount to buy a really high-tech camera at the student rate and not at the adult rate. Why do you think they had you? I'm joking, right? So the point is that you basically say to yourself, well, hey, actually profits might go down. Therefore, it might not be a good idea to price discriminate here because if a lot of the cameras are bought online and people just type in like a student ID, then actually seepage is very likely to happen here. Make sense? Now, the alternative evaluation, yeah? The other evaluation that they did is they were talking about, or in the Marxist genius evaluation, you know how we said they might be price discriminating between online and in-store? If I can show that whilst you might get the same thing in terms of a camera, but the service you're getting is different, that means that it is not price discrimination, it's product differentiation. In the extract, it bangs on about how who would not want to buy like a camera from like really enthusiastic and expert staff. You can try out the camera, you can literally like go to like a class on the camera, create calendars. There's like a million things that you could do in store that you can't do online. In other words, even if you end up getting the exact same camera, it might not be price discrimination because the actual service you're getting is different. In the same way that if you and I go on a flight and I'm in an economy class seat and you are in a business class seat, that is not price discrimination. They're charging obviously a higher price for you for your business class seat. That is product differentiation. Genius evaluation. Yeah. Now, alternative valuations, in case that wasn't that super clear, no problem. We've got other evaluations that we could deal with. So another evaluation is to basically question whether actually it makes even any sense to price discriminate between online and in store because information gaps don't really exist here. Most people have a mobile phone that has access to the internet. Therefore, if they were charging a lower price online compared to in store, I'd literally go on their website in their store, check. I'd be like, oh, it's cheaper here. Click and collect, mate. I'll buy it right now, right? At the cheaper price. Therefore, it doesn't make sense for them to price discriminate between online and in store. And actually, in the data, it shows that they're not. Yeah. It basically says prices will be matched to those of Jessops.com. In other words, they're not price discriminating between online and in store because it does not make sense to price discriminate. Yeah. Price discrimination, done. Right. Let's deal with another topic. Right. Let's get some energy into us. I know you guys are probably very, very tired. Let's keep going and do as much as we can for your exam on Monday, yeah? Right. Last year, the 15 marker, as you may know, was a merger question. It was about the impact of a merger between Activision and Microsoft. I think if they want to be a little bit evil, they can do the same question that is in the locked specimen paper that only teachers get access to, and you may potentially have access to from your school. And it was the effect of a demerger, and it was specifically a demerger of a conglomerate. And it was the effect, not just of that, but the effect on efficiency. Let's deal with it. Yeah. So imagine the question says the assess the likely impact or the effect on efficiency of a demerger of a conglomerate. Let's go. Let's get ourselves together. Take a deep breath and talk about it. What are the four efficiencies that you need to know? Let's revise that first. The first efficiency is productive efficiency. What is productive efficiency? Productive efficiency is where you are operating at the lowest point on your AC curve. And the rule is MC equals AC. You should know that when MC crosses through the AC curve, it is always at the lowest point on the MC curve. Yeah, or sorry, on the AC curve. Yeah. So that is productive. And the thing is about productive is that if I'm operating at the lowest point on my AC curve, if I draw it out really quickly, like that, well, do you guys agree that if I'm operating over there, I have fully taken advantage of all the economies of scale available to me? There are no more economies of scale. I fully exploited them. I've tapped into all the economies of scale. Yeah. Then we've got allocative efficiency, which is where consumer welfare is going to be maximized. And the way to remember that is MC equals AR. Now, I had a student, Lily, a couple of years ago, who was really artistic. Yeah. Like, and as part of her revision, she did like these A3 sheets on different topics. And one day I was looking at her notes and I looked at her and I was like, Lily, why the hell have you drawn a parrot? It's an incredibly drawn parrot, but why do you have a parrot drawn on your notes? And her answer was legendary. She turned around to me and went, Macaw! And it stuck with me forever, yeah? The parrot makes that sound, MC equals AR. That is how I remember it forever now. What a legendary way to remember it. If that works for you, it works. Who knows if it does, yeah? Anyways, MC equals AR is allocative efficiency. And then we've got things like dynamic. Now, dynamic doesn't have a set definition, yeah? It's simply where firms are innovating. They're investing into like new technology, and that's a really good thing to know. And the last one is X inefficiency. Again, I will deal with it in terms of, actually, no, let's deal with X inefficiency. X inefficiency is the idea that a firm operating at, let's say, that quantity there, their cost should be at C1 over here. But because often it's a lack of competition, organizational slack, they start to become really lazy. And so their cost ends up being at this point here. Sorry, what am I doing? So their cost ends up actually being over here at C2. So they are X inefficient by this distance. Yeah? Okay, let's answer the question together. How do we deal with a question about efficiency of a demerger? Well, I kind of reverse the question. I go to myself, hey, if I know what the good and bad things are about a merger and the impact they have on efficiency, I can reverse it. I can flip it over. So last year's paper, if you were dealing with it, you would have probably talked about, hey, the firm is better placed to tap into economies of scale. And so that results in them becoming more productively efficient, right? But the bad thing is that they experience diseconomies of scale. They're too big a firm. They have too many staff that they need to manage over many, many countries, in this case, many industries, yeah? And so now I can reverse it. How do I reverse it? What do I say to myself? I go, okay. So my topic sentence would read something like this. It would go, one likely impact of a demerger of a conglomerate is an increase in productive efficiency. Right, let me show you why. Here's costs. Here's the AC curve, yeah? Okay. Do you guys agree that when a firm merges, they might actually become too big? The firm might be actually operating somewhere over here where they're beyond the MES, and so their cost is too high. It's there. When they demerge and they now sell off one of the parts of the business, do you guys agree that obviously they produce a smaller amount of output? They're a smaller firm. They're not as big, yeah? And that output level is somewhere over here, Q2. Now, very important to understand something. What I am showing is not economies of scale, because economies of scale is only when two things are satisfied. Average cost is falling, which is happening here, but output is rising. Output's not rising here. So what this is just less diseconomies of scale. You can explain it as, hey, look, when they were merged and they were in multiple different industries, they may have been experiencing diseconomies of scale. They have way too many staff. There's too many like managers that need to basically coordinate different things. So really, they're probably at that point in Q1 when they demerge and they can focus on what they're really good at. They are likely to become more efficient because they're experiencing less diseconomies of scale. Yeah, that is an outstanding opening analysis. Let's evaluate. The evaluation is the opposite. The evaluation is, do you guys agree that the firm now aren't able to tap into the same level of economies of scale? They, as a smaller firm, can't take advantage of things like purchasing economies of scale. Or the one that I think works the best for a conglomerate is financial economies of scale. Because before, when they were going to the bank to take out a loan, they were able to take out a humongous loan at low interest because they could turn around to the bank and go, hey, we're diversified. If this sector doesn't do well, don't worry about it. We have other sectors that we could fall back on. And therefore, the bank would have given them a massive loan at low interest rates. They don't have that advantage anymore. In other words, the firm may be able to, may be incapable of tapping into the same level of economies of scale as they initially were able to, and therefore not increasing productive efficiency. It decreases productive efficiency. Yeah. Second analysis. Second analysis, we're going to say dynamic efficiency is going to go up. And the logic of why is twofold. One, do you guys agree that typically they're going to be selling businesses that are not doing very well? Yeah. So it might be that they're loss making or they're just not as profitable as they'd like them to be. So the first thing is they're now focusing all their energy on the businesses that they keep that are doing well. They don't need to keep cross subsidizing from one sector to another to keep that like failing business afloat. That's the first benefit. So that business now has more retained profit. But the second thing is, do you guys agree that when they sell these businesses, they're obviously selling them for money. They're not selling them for free. They're like, oh, yeah, here, take it, right? And therefore, when they sell these businesses, they generate loads of money and that adds to their profit and they can invest that profit. And suddenly now dynamic efficiency is going up. Consumers are getting better quality products, happy days, because they're focusing on what they're really good at. Yeah. If it was, by the way, a horizontal demerger, still valid, but I think a really good one that you could talk about for a horizontal demerger is the fact that now there's more competition. Those firms now, when they're separated, let's say two supermarkets that had merged get separated into like single supermarkets. The benefit now is there's more competition and therefore prices are likely to go down. So allocative efficiency will go up. So you can do it that way. Yeah. Right. The evaluation here is not as straightforward, but I could basically argue two things. One is they may have sold the business prematurely. They may have sold the company, but actually the profits may have started to go up in the near future. It was just temporarily not doing so well. And also now, because of the fact that they've sold off that business, they can't cross subsidize whenever they have like, the industry they keep is struggling. Yeah. Does that make sense? So these are the kind of things that you could talk about. Yeah. And that's the evaluation. Now, again, by the way, if it was a demerger of a horizontal integration, it could still be an oligopoly. And if it's still an oligopoly, even with the demerger, they might form a cartel, might collude. And so consumers may not get lower prices, they might get higher prices. Yeah? Cool. Right. That is how to deal with that awkward question about a demerger in case they ask a question on a demerger. Right. Let's go through a few more things. I have quite a lot of things on my list. Um, I am deliberating us taking a little break. I've never done that before in a Q&A, but just so that we can breathe a little bit. Can I take a break? I will be back. I will start a completely new stream. So just go back on the channel again, please, on both YouTube and on TikTok. Let's do this. There's a lot of things that I want to basically get through. Yeah. So can we take a break, please, for 15 minutes? Yeah. So 9:35 on the dot, I will be restarting the stream. But I think that you guys probably need to take a little break. My voice definitely needs a little break. I